name and any organisation that you're appearing on behalf of.
Yeah, my name's Stephen Jolly. I'm the Mayor of the City of Yarra.
Thanks very much.
Of public housing within the City of Yarra, of any municipality in the state of Victoria. And you're sitting here in the midst of the North Richmond public housing estate, which is the biggest public housing estate in Victoria. And according to Richard Wynne, when he was the MP for this area, he told me that it was also the biggest public housing estate in the Southern Hemisphere. Even no estate in South America is bigger than this particular public housing estate here. And it's not just for the public housing tenants of the residents of Yarra, a question of the people who live in the three massive big public housing estates that we have here at North Richmond, the biggest, Fitzroy in my ward, Collingwood, and also the whole plethora of public housing walk-ups from the richest areas of Yarra up in North Fitzroy, North Carlton, right down here in Richmond, but also the open space that surrounds the public housing estate, especially in my ward in Fitzroy. You'll see that thousands of people or hundreds of people every day, not just public housing tenants, but people who are not public housing tenants, accessing the green open space around the towers. One of the advantages of being a public housing tenant in Yarra is that we are blessed with many services, health services, mental health services, every type of services in Gertrude Street, in Brunswick Street. Here, we're literally sitting in the largest community health centre probably in Victoria, if not Australia, here at North Richmond. And that's one of the great advantages of being a public housing tenant in this area. Now, God knows there's problems on the public housing estate. There is literally not a day that goes by that I'm not meeting either individually or collectively with public housing tenants in Collingwood, Fitzroy or North Richmond about 1,000,001 day-to-day issues. The lifts aren't working, the cooker's not working, there's somebody sleeping in the collective laundry facilities. And I mean, I'm sure you've heard these stories again and again and again. But our position as a council is that bad public housing needs to be replaced by good public housing. We need to refurbish wherever possible rather than demolish. Retrofitting the towers for earthquake, for disability access, which, by the way, as somebody who works, as I do, in the commercial construction industry, there's probably not a single high-rise tower in Melbourne that I haven't worked on in the last 26 years. 80% of private high-rise apartments in in Melbourne, in Victoria, don't reach the minimum standards that are being used against the public housing towers right now as a reason for demolish. What we do is we retrofit, we fix them. If there's a problem, we fix it. Demolishing has always got to be the last option. According to Office, and it was in The Age, and many other people have said it, it'll be $1.5 billion cheaper to retrofit than to demolish, plus it keeps the open space, which is exactly what Richard Wynne, when he was the Housing Minister and MP 15 years ago, did at Fitzroy, at Atherton Gardens Estate. When they said there was problems there, they did a massive program of retrofitting, of refurbishing on that estate, and that's one of the reasons that structurally it's probably the best estate in the state of Victoria. But of course, that actually misses the point, because it's not about protecting green open space or the best interests of public housing tenants. In my view, this attempt by the government, this announcement that they want to knock down all the towers, is about giving prime inner city real estate land to developers. So instead of kids playing soccer around Atherton Gardens, or around North Richmond Estate, or around the Collingwood Estate, we'll have high-rise for rich people in penthouses overlooking in Fitzroy, Gertrude Street, with a beautiful city view. Can you imagine how expensive and how much the state government can make from selling that land? The open space will be built with new apartments, and we've seen an example of that on the Carlton Estate, where private was put on a public housing estate in Carlton, outside of the city of Yarra, it's the city of Melbourne, and what we've seen now is that the green open space is largely gone. There's plenty of other places in the city of Yarra for us to reach our target. We were really recently told by the Planning Minister of Victoria and by the Premier, who turns a blind eye or supports the demolition of the towers. So I say, stop before it's too late. So what we're asking you guys to think about is, number one, a moratorium to properly look at consultation. We haven't had proper consultation. A retrofit instead of destruction of the towers. We want you to call for the release of the Cabinet submission documents relied on to justify this policy. Make them public. Without these documents, how can this inquiry be expected to fulfill its terms of reference, especially the obligation to examine the rationale and alternatives to demolition? As an example, this is an example of policy on the run. This announcement, by the way, by Dan Andrews, the spectre of Dan Andrews is long gone, but that spectre still lies over this government. This was policy made 7 days before he resigned as a premier. It was policy literally on the run, literally as he's walking down the road. And this government seems absolutely paralysed and fearful of challenging that decision by Dan Andrews. It is the worst decision that has been made by the last government. Full stop. Knocking down 40 odd plus towers, 12 of which are in the city of Yarra, devastating the lives of thousands of the poorest people. And let's put a racial component to this. I'm the councillor for Fitzroy. Everybody who's rich, everybody who's white in Fitzroy does not live in the public housing. Almost everybody who's poor, almost everybody who's a person of colour in Fitzroy lives on the 4 high-rise towers. This is ethnic cleansing. This is class cleansing. If those towers go down, Fitzroy will be wall-to-wall rich people. It will be no different than Camberwell and parts of the inner east. And God bless them, they're great areas, but they're different from here. This is a richly cosmopolitan area where people from all classes, from all parts of the world, and that's why people love living in Richmond and in Fitzroy and in Collingwood and in Yarra in particular. We will fight this. So we ask you to be brave. Get these documents released, ask for a moratorium, and support the public housing tenants that almost unanimously are saying this is bad policy and policy made on the run. Rest. And where the governments are not democratic and they're fearful of government. So they've heard rumours that, you guys haven't even got the policy documents and the cabinet submissions on this. So you can imagine what it would be like if you've just, come over from South Sudan or Somalia and you're living on the estate and you're glad to be here because you know you're not going to get killed. But when you hear that the government's going to knock your house down and they're going to take away all the green open space because you don't have, I'm stating it friggin' obvious, so you don't have any gardens when you're living in a public housing estate. So the open space around it are the gardens for those kids. It's
the existing infrastructure then demolish and rebuild, and made a reflection that 80% of the apartments in Melbourne that you've worked on don't meet current minimum disability standards, for example. Do you think that, at what point do you think that the condition of some of the towers gets to a point that makes it not feasible to renovate or retrofit? And are you familiar with what happened at Elgin Street with the 2 red bricks?
It's good. Thank you for that question.
There's no evidence that you agree that there are circumstances where that can occur in public housing, that there are circumstances where public housing may become not fit for purpose.
But the reason that you and I aren't 100% certain whether or not the towers have got to that stage or not, I don't think they have. You may think they probably do.
The one in Elgin Street, for example.
It's because the government...
What's your evidence to us about the condition of the Elgin Street tower?
Oh, I mean, if you talk to the ward councillor, who's a party comrade of yours, Councillor Sarah McKenzie, and
so I mean the ones in Elgin Street and Carlton that have been...
No, I don't know enough about the Elgin Street ones, but in terms of the ones in Clifton, I can say that. But the reason that we're having this debate about whether or not, should these towers come down, are they fixable for retrofitting or not? The reason that we don't actually know the answer to that is that your government have not released the cabinet papers. If we had those papers, maybe you're right, maybe I'm right. But who knows? Because for some reason unknown to, I don't know, maybe you know, but I don't know, they will not release this paperwork. If they were proud of their decision, if they thought this was better for public housing tenants and for the state of Victoria, they would surely release these papers to the media, to the public, and to us. And as a consequence, because they haven't, Ryan and I, Mr. Batchelor and I, have got to have this, hypothetical debate about issues that people at Spring Street literally know the answer to. We'll release that paperwork.
I'll now pass over what you sort of alluded to, issues in buildings that have been raised in the past, where we've had fails with sewer stacks and these types of things. We're going to
Sorry, I didn't catch that last sentence.
So when we've got issues with buildings, whether it's sewer stacks, whether it's access, you talked about your experience in construction, and let's bring it back because I'm just really interested in the broader.
But I'll just let you finish that.
Yeah, like it's almost a broader philosophical question. Should we lessen standards on housing Should we achieve the best practice, or is it okay to have a lower standard of?
Well, it's not a question of having a lower standard. They want to demolish them. We're trying to retrofit them, which is to make them better, and parallel with that, meet our 44,000 target. You can't tell us to build 44,000 new homes, as the state government's asked us to do, or to approve, I should say, 44,000 new homes, and then simultaneously knock down 12 towers. That makes absolutely no sense. I mean, we need to protect the towers, improve the towers. No one's saying they're perfect. I mean, I'm an ex-public housing tenant. He's an ex-public housing tenant. Nobody around here, and all these people here, many of them live in public housing. No one's ever going to say they're perfect. But that has to be done parallel with trying to reach our targets 40. And I've given you, as the mayor, loads of examples I can give you as to where we can build and reach our 44,000 new homes target. It's not an either or, in my opinion.
I'll now pass over to Ms.
Advocacy and your lived experience, which is very, very valuable to us when you're speaking about this area and what this means to the people. I hear the passion and I hear the anger and the frustration. What is the thing that's making you most angry and most frustrated about these decisions and the way that the government has gone about them? Is it simply the lack of transparency, the lack of information? Is it the impact on the people? What is making you the most angry and the most frustrated?
Well, for me, I'll go first, and I'm sure Mecca will explain better than I can. But I just think I just hate bullies, and I just think what we have here is the poorest people in our area, the people who have had. I mean, you talk to the kids around here, you talk to their parents. Some of their stories, like you would have to have a heart of stone not to be touched. What they've come through to get here, what they went through back home, and how they love living here and feeling the sense of personal security they have here. The residents who live on the 12 public housing towers and the walk-ups in the city of Yarra are some of our most valuable members of our community. For example, our current Yarra Citizen of the Year is a resident from the Fitzroy public housing, from the public housing estate. They add massive social capital to this community, but they're also very vulnerable and they're very scared of government. And for the government to say, oh yes, the planning minister and the premier, oh yes, we want to build 44,000 new homes. We hear the young people of Australia telling us there's a housing crisis. We've told that NIMBY council and all those NIMBY councils we're going to build houses, but at the same time demolish houses for the poorest people, the most vulnerable people in the area. That's a form of bullying. Because the people who don't live in public housing around here are mainly professional managerial class. It's no longer a working class suburb. It's a knowledge economy. They're very well connected. They have their associations, have their organisations. They often, are in politics or in the media and so on, and they're really well organised and they put up resistance to the government. The people who live on the estate are not that well connected, and it really breaks my heart as an ex-public housing tenant to see the fear. That's where the passion comes from for me, and we will stand with them to the very, very end to ensure that the documents are released. And by the way, if they were really confident, the government, that we were wrong and they were right, they would release these documents. Yeah. What have they got to hide? Surely.
I agree with you. Councillor...
I'll put it to you differently. If we had a moratorium on this decision, if the documents were released, we could have a proper debate about what you're saying, what I'm saying, what all the members of this committee are saying, what the community are saying, and then we could come up with the right conclusions. We are being asked to have a view on a matter where they're hiding the information from us. Let's just talk in a total abstract. What Mr. Batchelor said to me and what you said to me could potentially be 1,000% correct, and these buildings are about to collapse in 5 minutes' time. Well, if that's the case, they should release the documents, because surely they would have a duty of care to those residents. It says to me, when they don't want to release the documents, that they're scared of releasing the documents because it doesn't back up their conclusions, which is to flog off these towers and put, in the main, private, expensive apartments for rich people on what's currently public housing land.
Robinson from Office.
Steve Minton, also from Office.
Thank you, Simon and Steve. We'll hand over to you guys. I understand 5 minute sort of statement at the start, and then we'll go to questions. Okay, so whichever one of you wants to kick off, over to you. Welcome.
Right. Firstly, thanks to you for the opportunity to come to speak about our research today. As we mentioned, I'm one of the directors of a not-for-profit design and research practice called Office. For the last 4 years, we've worked with public housing residents affected by Homes Victoria's redevelopment plans. The residents approached us to explore refurbishment options, something that was not offered to them by Homes Victoria and deemed unviable. Residents saw refurbishment as a way to stay in their homes and avoid the social and environmental costs of demolition. Today, we have undertaken 3 refurbishment studies here in Melbourne under the banner of Retain, Repair, Reinvest, or RRR. The objective of RRR is to understand whether it's both technically and economically feasible to retain the existing public housing via refurbishment. RRR identifies the uncaptured costs associated with demolition and rebuild renewal programs and addresses all of the criteria presented by Homes Victoria to justify estate demolition, including energy efficiency, livability standards, structural capacity, and the additional housing need. These studies have been undertaken largely pro bono and have relied on the generosity of those involved. Across these 3 reports, we've engaged the services of a structural engineer, environmentally sustainable design engineer, quantity surveyor, building surveyor, economists, and housing researchers to produce accurate feasibility studies. Our freedom of information requests for existing drawings and structural assessments have been denied, and as such, our work is based on publicly available information and the experience of the consultants involved. As such, we do note that building-specific investigations would be required to further support any of our findings.
At the end of 2023, we began working with residents from the Flemington estate. This was again due to refurbishment being stated as unviable despite Homes Victoria providing no evidence. We held 2 community engagement sessions and worked with our consultants to understand the feasibility of refurbishment and increasing the number of new homes through infill. These findings from our report show that refurbishment and infill is viable from an economic, environmental and social perspective. ESD Engineers Macau Group showed we can achieve a 7.5 NatHurst rating, a minimum 5-star Green Star rating, and a 30% energy reduction, lowering residents' bills through solar panels, water reuse, double glazing and insulation. We can achieve the livable housing design guidelines for accessibility, meeting the majority of the better apartment standards, while also upgrading the units to achieve acoustic and fire requirements as overseen by Nicholas Building Surveyors. Shear Force Engineering reports that the buildings can be made to meet current seismic standards and the facade panels are able to be removed for new balconies. Our infill proposal places new housing above existing car parks, preserving open space and trees. This approach matches the same amount of density of the 2023 Ernst & Young development study for the site commissioned by the government. This has all been costed by Melbourne quantity surveyors with input from SGS Economics Modelling to find that refurbishment and infill could have a $364 million cost saving across the whole estate. Since releasing the report, there's been some feedback from the government in things that we had not addressed. This is the beauty of releasing information publicly. Others are then able to comment on it. 3 key statements were the ongoing issues with sewer stacks, the need for a stretch lift, and the disruption caused to residents by building next to the towers. These are all real concerns and we welcome the opportunity to publicly address them. While the sewer issues were not raised with us during our community sessions, we now understand that in some cases they are an issue. Like all service failures, these can be replaced, as recently indicated by Homes Victoria in their tender advertisement last Thursday for, and I quote, a variety of work relating to the replacement of sewer stacks and then make good works to these areas after stack replacement within occupied public housing high-rise towers, end quote. We have just recently looked at installing new lift cores with a stretcher-sized lift car onto public housing towers of the same age in Sydney. This is possible and estimated to cost around $600,000. A similar approach could be taken to the towers here in Melbourne. Finally, while we acknowledge that these works will be disruptive to residents, a similar approach is ironically currently underway at Flemington Estate, with new buildings being built within the old estate boundary right next to the towers. This demonstrates that Homes Victoria and their contractors have the ability to navigate the complexities of such work while considering the residents' health and well-being. And so in closing, we'd like to thank all the residents and advocates who have assisted with this work. The social harm caused through relocation is detrimental. While the figures have not been reported in Victoria, there is evidence from the UK that 1 in every 100 residents will die during the relocation process as part of estate demolition. This is due to the severe stress and uncertainty placed on vulnerable people. We need to remind ourselves of this, especially as we think about the health and well-being of the 10,000 public housing residents who live in the towers and are already feeling the uncertainty of the redevelopments. This is a huge project and will affect the lives of so many Victorians, So we need to be sure all options have been explored and that these decisions are made in a transparent way with those affected the most at the centre of it. Thank you.
First off, you mentioned in your opening about freedom of information requests. I imagine that would have been a fairly extensive list of documents that you requested. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you send us through a copy of the documents that you requested, if that's all right, and take it on notice? You don't have to provide that right now, but if you could, it'd be interesting to see what you saw where the gaps were in information as well. Just anecdotally though, on your own experience, you obviously use figures that were publicly available. What figures did you find it particularly difficult to obtain in order to come to your conclusion here?
It wasn't so much the figures as the assessment reports. So assessment of the current condition of services in the towers, the assessment of the structural condition of these buildings. So it was these kind of assessments that we wanted to have access to better understand.
And that would flow through obviously to your estimates on how much. Even so, I had a look, I think at the end of yours it says the overall cost savings if you reinvest is what, $363 odd million or thereabouts. That's huge. I mean, when you said that the government had obviously taken the opportunity to grill your figures, where were the shortfalls in what you had done compared to what they had sort of said?
Well, actually, going back to your previous question about figures, so one of the biggest costs that we've found through our studies is the cost to relocate residents, so house them during the process of construction.
Yeah.
We've found figures from an affidavit through a court case around the North Melbourne estate, which puts that figure at $150 per day per dwelling. And so we're multiplying that figure across the...
Extrapolated that, okay.
Exactly. So if we were able to actually get the current figures for that, we could also include that in our costings, but that's a huge cost that's put on to the government. And these are things that we're calling the uncaptured costs of the project. So it's not just the construction costs, but the associated costs to delivering a project of this nature.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm just going by what you're saying here. You're of the firm view that it is far cheaper and far better socially to reinvest rather than knock down and start again.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. There are many others that have that view as well. And I think, where was it? Averaged out, where was it? $400,000 per unit as opposed to $680 for the reconstruction on average.
Yep. That's including the demolition. So again, these are the uncaptured costs. Now, how much does it cost to demolish the building and then to rebuild it anew?
So essentially, on those figures, give or take, it's about 2/3 of the price, maybe a little bit less, which is... So I guess, these reports are out in public. Did the government come to you and say, well, how did you come to these figures and, maybe you're onto something?
No.
What response did you get?
We presented to Homes Victoria.
Yeah.
There wasn't any questions.
No questions?
The presentation.
So sorry, let me just get this straight. You presented to Homes Victoria at a briefing of some sort. Can we have a copy of the things that you presented to them as well? If that's all right, thanks. Just so we know what they've seen. And sorry, I've only got about 10 seconds left, but the response that you got from them was no questions. They just accepted it and that was it?
Yeah. And that's been our experience with the other two reports we've produced.
Okay. Sorry, my time's just gone up. I'll hand over.
I've been told that the reason for moving residents out of the Carlton red brick towers was due to a failed sewer stack. These buildings are completely different to the other 42 towers. Is that right?
Correct.
Thank you. Could you tell us more about the recent information that you uncovered about the ability to make good existing towers? Existing sewer stacks. My apologies.
This is a tender that came out last Thursday, from Homes Victoria. It's on the Live Victoria website. We can only access the information that's public, but I can read it out again, but it's stating that they're looking for a contractor to fix the sewer issues of some high-rise towers while the towers are being occupied.
Just add to that, it's an advanced tender notice, so it doesn't outline, it's text, it doesn't outline which sites they're planning on doing these things, but it does outline that there is an approach here that obviously it must be possible to do this work if they're currently going out to tender for it. Yep.
Thank you. Should the government pursue its plan for demolition of all 44 public housing towers based on the case study of the red brick towers?
No.
Thank you. The government says the buildings don't meet modern regulatory standards. This is a reason for the demolition. Do you think that's a reason for demolition?
No.
And what percentage of buildings in Melbourne would actually meet current regulatory codes?
We wouldn't be able to answer that, sorry, yeah. A large amount of buildings, wouldn't meet current regulatory codes, including a number of buildings that would be heritage listed and incredibly significant within Victoria, but the actual percentage we wouldn't be able to.
Okay.
Report, I think the primary proposal in your report, there are a series of options presented on resident relocation, but your primary proposal is that we should relocate 5 floors at a time, 3 retrofit refurbishment proposals in the towers. Is that right?
That's one option, yeah.
One option or option 1?
Option 1.
Yeah, okay. So you would have residents living in the towers whilst you were doing these works to them. Sorry, I can't. You need to say
Possible, yes.
Possible. So there's 3 options that we put forward. Yeah, we're not saying that one's over the other. It's very dependent on the site, what the residents would like, all of those sorts of things. Yeah. So it isn't that there's one preferred option in ours. There's 3 different ways that we could approach this. Yeah.
And what are the costings based on?
What was that? Sorry.
What are your costings based on?
Costings based on the residents don't have to be relocated off the site.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just a little concerned that on the one hand you tell people that you don't need to relocate the residents, but on the other hand that means that they're in a building where your proposal basically rests on spending all day, every day, drilling holes in concrete walls, and the particular noise and discomfort that might create for the residents that you are essentially telling at the moment that this is a better option for them than what they're currently being put forward. And my question is that a little bit disingenuous?
I mean, it depends on how this is undertaken. I think it's about giving the residents an option.
So they'll be allowed to stay?
Potentially, yeah. I think giving them an option. I think there's obviously a lot of international examples of this kind of work being carried out, which I can send to the committee. And it's obviously a more sensitive approach to doing construction. You have to be mindful of these serious concerns about the residents' health and well-being.
What's the noise threshold here? At what point do you say it's actually, you've got a duty of care as a landlord to not have people living in a floor below, they're drilling through concrete?
Absolutely. And I mean, that's why we provided 3 options. So I think there's a level of further investigation that needs to be undertaken to understand these serious issues as well, and put those forward.
It's not as simple as you present. You need to do further work on the structure and on the process of relocation. You say that's true?
Yeah, it's a feasibility study, so yeah, there needs to be future work.
A lot of questions not yet answered in your proposal.
Pardon?
A lot of things not yet answered in the proposal.
I think it's a feasibility study. It's to that level of degree. It's not concept design. It's not sketch design. And as we said, with the information we have available, we can only work with what we have available as well. Yep.
Go to Miss Grey Barbaria?
I appreciate it. I will just say that demolition is currently happening in Flemington State.
It's not.
Public housing.
That's a lie. That is a
Public
lie.
housing residents are currently having to deal with noise.
That is a lie, Anastasia. That is a lie.
At the moment. Now, I just want to come back to shedding light on why this government might have skipped the process that you have gone through, and to do what you have done, coming to a decision. Why has it been left up to a not-for-profit architecture firm to undertake this work?
not sure. Yeah, it's beyond us, sorry.
And when you say it's beyond you because the government hasn't done their role in this?
We don't know. We're unclear if the government has done this work and won't release it publicly, or if it just hasn't been done. We're not sure.
But you've obviously felt the need from the community, from public housing residents in Flemington and North Melbourne. You see this gap. You've also spoken to the committee today referring to this kind of retrofit repair work, case studies from overseas working well, also interstate. Who do you think is benefiting from this? By you doing this and the government not stepping into their role, who is benefiting from your work looking into this?
Who's benefiting from us doing this feasibility study?
The report,
Well, hopefully
exactly.
the community have something to push back on what's happening to them. And we've seen that in Barrack Beacon, and I think maybe to the point around demolition happening where people are in homes. Barrack Beacon was demolished around one of the main residents we were working with. She was still living on the site while that estate was demolished around her home. So we hope that the work is there to open up a conversation like we're having now around the possibility of retrofitting these buildings, and that there is there's really positive economic outcomes to the state budget. There's also huge social outcomes, especially for the residents, and there's an enormous environmental benefit, and that the state government has really ambitious net zero targets, and if we are going to hit those targets, it's very important that we construct and build in another way. Construction industry is very, very polluting industry. Yeah.
And sorry, just to add to that, and there's examples of this being done in Europe, now in New South Wales, and that we can kind of lead that as well here in Victoria.
Thank you. Can I just ask one more question?
Yeah, of course, I've been pretty lenient.
How do you compare quality between the towers and the newer community housing? Can you speak to that?
We probably can't speak to specifics because we haven't seen the technical drawings of those buildings or anything like that. I think that, to Simon's point earlier, the buildings they're built out of concrete. It's a very solid material. It lasts for a very long time. The way in which we build buildings now everywhere isn't probably the same quality. The lifespan of a building now is between 30 and 40 years is about what a building's meant to last now. That's very different to what it was 50 or 60 years ago. So yeah, buildings that are clad in aluminium and those sort of things don't tend to last for as long, and the quality of materials we use isn't probably as good as it was previously.
As assessment, you'd need to go and do drilling works of the concrete.
Yeah.
They're the kind of things that are happening now at Alfred Street and at the Flemington site, which my colleague has misleadingly described as demolition works. But that's exactly the sort of thing that your evidence is that you would need to do in terms of testing of the concrete to make a final assessment as to the structural adequacy of the buildings for your plan. Would that be a fair thing to say?
I don't think so. So the drilling that they're doing currently is to understand if the structure of the concrete is at capacity that could be retained.
But you just said your evidence earlier was that to make an assessment as to
But I think the work that's going on now is
sorry. Your evidence earlier was that you needed to do. You weren't able to do any kind of assessment of the structural capacity of the concrete panels to take the structure, the steel structure that is at its core, your solution to extending the structural life of these buildings. To do that assessment, you said, as I understood it, that you would need to do some drilling and some testing of the concrete.
Yes.
Which is the sort of works that Ms. Barberio is suggesting is a problem.
Because the drilling that is currently underway is to understand how to remove and...
But isn't it the same? Isn't it the same
it's
thing?
the same type of testing, but the outcome's completely different.
But So your problem is with the outcome, not with the process.
Yes.
Okay. So if it was for your purposes, it'd be perfectly acceptable to do what's happening now.
If it was for the purposes of keeping residents in their homes rather than demolishing,
I just find
I would find that,
along with the disingenuousness of the proposal, I find that sort of hypocrisy a little bit hard to shake.
yeah, I don't think our proposal is disingenuous in any way. I think that there's work there from a structural engineer to show that there is a way to retrofit these buildings. We're not in any way saying that there isn't more work that could be done, and if we had greater information, we could provide more accuracy. But the proposal there is to show that it is possible to structurally upgrade these buildings with the information.
It might be
Hold on, we'll probably finish that one. We'll go to Mr. Puglielli and then we'll finish up from there.
Thank you, Chair. If the government made the structural assessments and other key documents available publicly, what would this mean for organisations like yours to make sure that you're providing robust as possible alternative models?
I mean, we could be certain about all of this.
Yeah, we wouldn't have to have this discussion, to be honest.
The residents wouldn't have to be training themselves to equipment at the Husing Towers, and we could have a much more constructive conversation around if we were to demolish these buildings, how do we go about this in the best way?
And to add to that, I think we're open to having that. If the information's there, we're really happy to look at it and have that discussion and do those assessments. But the information hasn't been provided. There hasn't been an assessment. There's been no public feasibility study on these towers on how if they could be retrofitted, and so that's why we've done this work. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
believe the reports that have been made publicly available by building surveyors and engineers about the existing condition of some of the buildings. For example, the report that was tabled in June last year from April 2022 from Approval Systems on the Elgin Street Towers said that there was evidence that the sewer stacks and risers were failing and subject to significant leaks. Dampness in the walls and the formation of mould appear to be the sewer stacks appear to be the source of that internal dampness. That there was evidence of extensive corrosion of concrete reinforcement. That there was non-compliant ceiling heights in common corridors, and that reduced ceiling height is a health and an amenity concern and a consideration for smoke layer in the event of fire. Do you believe that? Have you read it? Do you believe it?
I think it's uncontroversial that Rahu believes in evidence of the government's managed decline of public housing.
Have you read it?
I haven't got it in front of me, so I'm not sure.
You haven't read these reports in preparing both your submission, your position, and the evidence coming before us today.
I've seen those reports.
I asked Harry, had he read them?
I'm part of a group of people. I'm not the only person required to read reports. That's not my role.
Right.
My role is to speak for my members, and we've got a lot of people who've read all of these reports.
And are you concerned by them, and do you think that it demonstrates that the government needs to take action to improve the condition of those who are tenants of the public housing towers?
I couldn't hear the question, sorry. Could you speak up just a little bit?
Do you believe these reports? Do you think it demonstrates that the government needs to take action to improve the condition of the tenants who live in these public housing towers?
I believe that there are a lot of improvements that need to be made in the public housing towers. I don't think that's a controversial statement. I think that it's been pretty well documented that the estates have been basically run down and not maintained for many years. Am I believing that all alternatives have been looked at, and that is being part of the decision-making process for the government? Not necessarily.
Right, time's up.
I was going to ask
Mr. Puglielli.
Thank you, Chair.
Apologies.
I'll do one further. We've been hearing for quite some time, beyond just the timeline of this inquiry, that there are public homes both in the towers, but also blocks of walk-up apartments and also standalone public homes that have been left vacant for significant periods of time, even years at a time. Now, do you think there's any justification for this, given the number of people who are waiting on wait lists right now for a home? I do think there is a justification for this, and that justification is the same justification we're using to leave a lot of properties empty in the private sector. That's profit. Profit for developers, profit for investors. Yeah, it's a great reason if profit is your motive.
Yeah, and if profit's not your motive, then there's no justification. We saw, under Kennett, we saw that, public housing rents used to go to the maintenance and acquisition and repair and, building of public housing. That was removed. Now public housing rents go to consolidated revenue, or whatever Victoria calls it, and it's just not reinvested. So reintroducing that requirement that public housing rents, go back into maintaining public housing would be great. I've been inside a lot of empty public housing and it's shocking and it makes me really upset.
Last question, Mr. B. You said that disability isn't a monolith and one size doesn't fit all. But we do have disability access standards, we do have a Disability Discrimination Act, they do have widths of doorways which should be made common and entry standards for getting into showers. Do you think that any proposal to renovate or retrofit the public housing towers should comply with current disability access standards?
Ideally, yes. I think that.
What does ideally mean?
I think that ideally, in this case, would mean that where possible you meet disability standards. I would say that when looking at this issue, the private sector does not meet with a lot of disability standards.
Is that the standard we should hold government to? What the private sector gets away with?
No, but I don't think that the government or the public sector has held itself to any worthwhile standard as far as maintaining the stock that it has over many years. So I'm trying to hold you to a higher standard than you're holding yourself. Yes, make them as accessible as possible. However, not everybody needs the same level of access, and the people that are there do find those homes accessible, as they have told us, as they have said before. And so if a home is accessible to the person living there, it seems to me to be pretty disingenuous to want to tear it down and rebuild it and put it in private hands to make it more accessible. And I will say that the new builds have shown themselves to be of far worse quality. We've been talking to people in the new builds that have happened in the last 5 or so years who are dealing with mold and leaks that the people in the current housing towers just aren't dealing with because they were built differently. And so I think that if we want to hold ourselves to our standards, then we need to hold ourselves to those standards.
If there is ample evidence of mould and leaks in the towers, let's not lie to the committee. I think we're done. We are going to call time on there.
500 million that was allocated to structural maintenance. So where does it all go? If public housing was overseen by an independent regulator, we'd be able to get answers. But Homes Victoria is mired in an opaque bureaucracy, starved of accountability, transparency, and lacking respect for its client base, us, the tenants. All we get told is there's no money. So why did they pay inspectors to do condition reports if there's no budget to undertake the works in the first place? Of course, this could be an asset assessment, and they're just waiting for the places to deteriorate to justify demolition and high-density replacement blocks. Another example of managed decline is the sewer stacks at the Carlton Red Brick Towers, which came up in the first hearing. At the community consultation last year, we were told they had to be demolished as the sewer stacks were failing. Yet this letter from DHHS in November 2019 clearly shows that the plumbing pipes at Nicholson Street were earmarked for replacement by DHHS. Obviously, this never happened, but that was the intention before Homes Victoria was created. Last year in Parliament, the member for Richmond, Gabrielle de Vietri, exposed the systemic neglect of the sewerage system across the Melbourne Towers, the ensuing health hazards, and the government's withdrawing of funds allocated to upgrade the sewer stacks across all the towers. And I quote, "This is clearly a deliberate act of neglect, not just to save money, but to make residents so uncomfortable, frustrated and even sick that they desperately want to move out. It's called eviction by neglect, and there's a well-documented history of governments doing this when they want to get rid of public housing." This shambolic state of public housing raises questions about the decision makers. Until the creation of Homes Victoria in 2020, public housing generally paid its way, though it's had heavy maintenance bills in the last 5 years or so due to neglect of the assets over time. So a couple of years ago, I took snapshots of the profit from rental income once the costs of council rates, maintenance and a couple of other categories are deducted from the gross rental income. Okay, so for example, in 2001, there was a net profit from rental income of 76 million. In 2006, it was 81 million. In 2012, it was 106 million. I think that's when the Liberals were in power. And then it declines down to 32 million in 2020. And from then on, it goes into the red, I think, due to the heavy maintenance bills. Okay. The Herald Sun has told us twice that Homes Victoria is on the brink of financial collapse. So there was an article in October 2022 and one in April this year. If this is the case, it's clearly due to the reckless extent of estate redevelopments and the need to purchase or rent places on the private market for relocating tenants. So I guess just my point about the profit from rental income is that public housing pays its way. It's not due to the public housing system that Homes Victoria is on the brink of financial collapse. So if Homes Victoria is on the brink of financial collapse, it's clearly due to the reckless extent of estate redevelopments and the need to purchase or rent places on the private market for relocating tenants. The other gigantic expense is the ground lease model, which is sheer financial lunacy. The first 7 GLM sites will cost around $2 billion in capital grants and service payments, albeit across 40 years, but those costs or service payments are likely to rise due to wages and construction costs. These GLM redevelopments are revenue negative for the government, whereas the estates could have been redeveloped and managed as public housing, which would be far more cost effective. So at the GLM sites, none of the rents from the tenancies are passed back to government. That's not part of the arrangement. So Homes Victoria is being propped up by grants from DFFH, presumably in order to fund the redevelopments. But it means that the public housing system is being starved of funds, as I've shown with the example of my estate. Yet, the board of Homes Victoria is comprised of people with stellar financial and development expertise, but they can't seem to rein in the spending. Their reckless decisions on mass redevelopments are socially harmful, as you've heard from so many residents in these hearings. Why weren't these extravagant redevelopments properly budgeted for in the first place? And just to quote from this article in 2022, October, Homes Victoria has warned Treasurer Tim Pallas that without a significant cash injection, it won't have enough money to cover core business expenditure. So Homes Victoria keeps getting very large grants from the department of around 500 million or 800 million every year since then. Could it be that the intention is to bankrupt the public housing system in order to justify further transfers to the corporatised housing associations? I certainly hope not. The sensible solution would be to abolish Homes Victoria and bring public housing operations back into government, severed from the external pressure which regards inner city estates as development opportunities. That way, a tighter rein could be kept on spending and more socially constructive decision-making would hopefully occur. Ideally, public housing shouldn't be a housing of last resort. If it was being built in sufficient quantity to meet the demand for it, down the track a few years, 20% of new construction could be allocated to people on moderate incomes, such as emergency service workers and the so-called working poor, who struggle to find affordable private rentals near their place of work. This would be a far superior outcome to the so-called affordable housing platform, which charges near market rents and has been beset with building faults post-construction. Thank you. So a man in his 90s accepted relocation offers 5 times, only to have the offers withdrawn. He then accepted an apartment that needed repairs and was not ready by the time he had to move, so he was put in a temporary apartment and the repairs were never completed. He became completely unsettled, couldn't get any justice from housing, and then passed away after 2 years of very sad stress. One severely disabled woman was put in a private rental and was told accessibility modifications would be done. But after she moved, the landlord refused to make the modifications or even do basic maintenance. One older woman ended up in hospital following her relocation as she was so traumatised by having to sever the ties with her home of many years. I think she went looking for her cat and she got disorientated and they took her to hospital for an assessment. And she's been in a nursing home ever since. And she was someone who used to walk around the estate every day with her walker, so she was a much loved person. But since then, she's been in a nursing home. Another older woman died due to health complications, most likely brought on by the sudden announcement and then the relocation stress. She had a fear of lifts, which she clearly communicated to the relocation staff, but she was repeatedly offered upper-storey apartments. She then accepted places only to have them withdrawn. She finally accepted a place that was not in Port Phillip, but died very unexpectedly the day before she was to sign the lease. So there are real-world consequences to the decisions made by Homes Victoria and the government.
Helpful for us. Just to clarify, there are obviously some pretty distressing stories you read out from Barrack Beacon. Were you suggesting that the process contributed to some of those outcomes? It's a bit of a significant claim to make.
These are people's long-established homes, and if you read in my submission, also the direct accounts from the Flemington Towers residents. I put that in my submission because we had a few residents' meetings, the Safe Public Housing Collective. We organised a few residents' meetings at Flemington. So I don't know what else I can say about it. You know, if you're happy in your home and you've got your community there, and then you're suddenly told you have to move from there for probably at least 3 years, and as I said, they're not getting right of returns put in writing at the moment at Flemington. So of course it's going to be utterly traumatic.
It's just got limited time.
Sorry.
That's okay. Do you think that means that we can never go through a process of moving people out to to rebuild estates or to build more?
Right. Okay. Well,
is it forever? Does someone have a right to stay in that house forever, or can the government say we need to renovate for the collective better good?
Yeah. Well, firstly, you need to demonstrate that the redevelopments would be to to make better housing, not for some other spurious reasons like at Barrack Beacon. There was no need for that estate to be redeveloped.
Not even it's going to have a 43% increase in the amount of social housing on the site.
Is it that much?
Yep.
Well, it was originally 10%. Well,
it's 43%.
Yeah, but I mean, no, I think because they're done very insensitively. That's the point. You could have done infill. That's my whole point. You didn't need to bundle everyone out. You could have done a sensitive refurbishment as the office architects had proposed, and that way it's also much more focused on people's well-being, because you do one block at a time and then you can usually move them into somewhere else on the estate. I assume that Simon would have talked about that this morning. Look, my estate was a redevelopment of, I think it was grungy walk-ups, but, you know, it was done as 100% public housing. So that's the way that things used to be done. So I think there's far too much focus on demolishing public housing at the moment. That's the only way I can answer the question.
I'm going to pass it over now to Miss Payne.
Where I live, I was one of the first estates built by the Chifley government after the Second World War. The flat I live in was constructed in 1947. It's double brick. It has sprung wooden floors. There is it's been checked by surveyors who have said these buildings could last another 100 years. The tower's the same. We've had surveyors in the one on Racecourse Road who've said the same. Right, so we were required to hand over our evidence to that at the class action recently. However, Home Victoria were not required to hand over any information as to why they're no longer fit for purpose. I find that a little bit unfair. Also, the right to return. They pulled down one street here in Dunlop Avenue. It took 6 years to rebuild. Are you going to move house with your children in a new school perhaps and then move back again 6 years later? So the right to return, even if it was a piece of paper that is signed, people aren't going to, they don't return. I don't know very many who return because they've set up a life somewhere else. Would you want to remove every 6 years? Right. So, and also the relocating of people. If Homes Victoria have stock to put these people in, why do we have a waiting list of nearly 100,000 homeless people?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll let Claire answer that.
I've had quite a few meetings with politicians. Sam Ratnam was one, although she's no longer there. Gabriel de Vietri, Bill Shorten when he was in office. And as far as what Bill Shorten said, I don't know if I should swear, well, I won't, but he said that Dan Andrews' final parting, you know, the pulling them all down, he said it was the most effing stupid thing he'd ever heard, right? There is no need for these buildings to come down, and none of them are being replaced with public housing. And I think we should remember that public housing belongs to us, not the government, us. It's ours. It's a public asset.
Thanks.
So, yes, we cannot get a meeting with Minister Xing. She won't talk to us at all.
Oh, okay.
To impact the redevelopment will have on around 10,000 people living in public housing located across Melbourne. The LIV and this committee has observed the compelling evidence and submissions provided by residents and their representatives, which have detailed the fear and anxiety felt across the community, particularly due to the lack of consultation and clarity regarding the redevelopment, uncertainty as to where residents may be relocated, the impact this will have on their community ties, employment, access to health and other services, and whether they will be able to move back to their homes once the redevelopment has been completed, which according to Homes Victoria will likely not be until
2051 in some precincts. The decision by Homes Victoria to demolish and redevelop 44 public housing towers directly impacts the rights of residents protected under the Victorian Charter. Specifically, the right to freedom from arbitrary and unlawful interference with home and family, the protection of the family, and the right to security. Homes Victoria, as a public authority, has a duty under the Charter to give proper consideration to these rights and to act compatibly with these rights. These rights can be limited, but only if this is demonstrably justified and proportionate. The rights protected under the Victorian Charter are based on international human rights standards found in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, both of which Australia has ratified. These treaties seek to protect the fundamental principles of human dignity, equality and freedom. Any decision limiting these rights must be justified, proportionate, and it must consider less restrictive options to achieve any legitimate goals. These rights must be considered by government entities, such as Homes Victoria, when making decisions that limit rights protected under the Charter. Considering this, the LIV makes the following 3 submissions to the inquiry. Firstly, the Victorian Government must take a human rights-based approach and consult with residents throughout the proposed redevelopment, given its direct impact on residents' rights as protected under the Victorian Charter and under international law. Secondly, the Victorian Government must communicate with residents in an appropriate manner, in methods and in languages that can be readily understood. The decision to redevelop the towers should have been communicated to residents in the first instance, prior to publication in the housing statement. Moving forward, people living in the proposed development must be clearly and properly informed of the policy which will govern the relocation process, so they are fully informed about the process and any implications on their rights, particularly their rights to return once the redevelopments are finalised. Lastly, the LIV is concerned that the redevelopment project may have the effect of significantly reducing the availability of public housing in Victoria, and that the transition from direct government tenants to community housing means that residents are likely to have less security of tenure in terms of protections from eviction and significantly higher rents. We welcome the opportunity to discuss this submission with the committee, and we welcome further questions from the committee in relation to our submission on the redevelopment of the public housing towers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Kevin. I support the submission that's been made by the Law Institute. I'm here as somebody who has had a lifetime of experience in the law, but who also grew up in public housing. So when the government unannounced told 10,000 people that their homes were to be demolished, I was personally shocked, not just professionally shocked. So I'm coming at this issue with skin in the game from 2 different perspectives. I want to say that I think what was done was deplorable. It was deplorable because it offended standards of common decency. It's not the way that government should behave towards anybody, and it's deplorable because it involved what I consider to be very clear human rights breaches. It's not at issue in my own mind that the government was acting for what it considered to be important public purposes. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that it was acting in bad faith or that it didn't think that this was a good idea. But the question of the ends involved is only one side of the equation. The real question in my mind here is the way that this was done and the failure of the government to engage with the residents and indeed with the broader community about how this project should be done, whether it really did involve the demolition of all of the towers, whether there were alternatives, and what guarantees should be given to the existing tenants in the course of carrying out the project. Now, one thing that I think is really important and I want to stress is that the consent of the
tenants should have been sought, and that seeking of consent should have been the foundation of the government's project. That does not mean that an unreasonable refusal of that consent would end the projects. Quite the contrary. As has already been said, human rights can be limited in a proportionate way for proper ends, and possibly the government might have needed to go ahead anyway. But the history of following the human rights-based approaches, which has been mentioned, when the consent of the tenants or the persons affected is treated as the foundation for going forward, is that the job ultimately gets done. The good is achieved by means that are acceptable with minimum impact upon those concerned. Bill has mentioned the Charter. As a former judge of the Supreme Court of Victoria, and having regard to the fact that one of my fellow judges decided the case at first instance and it's now going on appeal to the Court of Appeal, I won't say anything about that. I will say that nobody in Victoria, a tenant or anybody else, should have to go to the Court of Appeal to have their human rights clarified. I think the fact that that has had to happen in this instance is unfortunate. I have advocated before committees like this on previous occasions for the right to housing to be incorporated in the Charter. If the right to housing were incorporated in the Charter, then I don't think there would be any doubt that the government would have to go about this kind of project differently, and that's a very good thing. I therefore repeat the submission I have made previously that the right to housing, expressed in terms of the international law rights, should be incorporated in the Charter. I heard the Prime Minister last week speaking about important international matters, making express reference to human rights. He did that from the position of saying that this is the way that things should be done. He was talking about extraordinarily important matters of international concern. I heard the Foreign Minister last night also stress the importance of human rights in relation to the same extraordinarily important matters of international concern. If Australia wants to make a claim against others to follow human rights, then we have to have our own house in order. You can't pick and choose which rights you choose to assert should be followed by others if you are not following those rights yourself. Our reputation internationally and within the region is strengthened when we do the right thing by human rights, and we should do so in this instance. I'll finish with one final thing that is to happen, and that is that I, as you know, was a former director of the Caston Centre for Human Rights Law and a professor of international human rights law at Monash University. The Caston Centre has established a human rights clinic through which students studying human rights assist persons wishing to take action to protect their rights, have them vindicated, or otherwise to make complaint. I will be working with that clinic and with the Inner City Community Legal Service, who has done an excellent job representing the residents of the towers, to make a complaint to the United Nations about what has occurred. Because, as you know, my view is that there is a breach, there has been a breach of the housing right in the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, although that is a matter for the complaint authority to determine. There are a number of ways through which such a complaint could be made. One of them is to the Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing, and that is the mechanism that has been chosen. And so over the course of the next couple of months, there will be prepared a complaint with tenants of the towers, through which it's their hope and my hope that the human rights issues that are raised here can be properly addressed and ventilated. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Now the United Nations. Do you think this should be sending alarm bells to the government that this plan should be cancelled?
I don't call for the cancellation of the plan because I don't have the information available to be able to make a decision about which way we should go forward. What I submit should happen is that there should be a pause, there should be a regroup, a human rights-based approach should be adopted, the applicability of the human right to housing to the circumstances should be recognised, and lastly, and going directly to your question, information should be shared with those interested about the rationale for the project, whether there are alternative means for achieving the same end, and that information should be shared with the representatives of the tenants and the broader community, because submissions to this committee have demonstrated that the broader community is interested in that issue.
Thank you.
Instance in the last couple of years where there was a set of circumstances that required the evacuation of two of the buildings in pretty quick time.
Talking about COVID-19?
No, I'm talking about the Elgin Street Towers in late 2022 when there was a catastrophic failure of the sewer stacks and the residents needed to be relocated within a 24 to 48 hour period. First of all, I think that was a probably reasonable action for the government to have to relocate people in those instances. Being made aware of through that sort of incident, being made aware of the potential deficiencies that existed in the buildings, do you think it is reasonable for the government to then embark upon a long-term assessment of the adequacy and have a plan to deal with potentially similar issues that might appear, given everything was built at the same time with the same materials, same construction methodology? The government should be taking a long, hard look at the long-term viability of the capital.
Unequivocally, yes.
It builds a little bit on what Mr. Berger was asking, but one of the challenges we've got is we've got to balance a whole lot of stuff. We've got to balance people's rights to have housing, to be engaged, to be consulted, people with disabilities' rights to have doors that are big enough for their wheelchairs to get through, which currently, if you live in any apartment in any of the towers, doesn't exist. How do we go about balancing out those rights? And at what point does the government have an obligation to ensure that all of the housing that it's providing is meeting contemporary standards rather than standards that existed when the buildings were designed in 1963?
Human rights is not a kind of basket into which you throw this consideration and that consideration, shake it all up, see where the balance lies. It involves balancing, but it involves balancing of a particular kind, and human rights does not tolerate disproportionate effects on people enjoying current interests in order to achieve generalised outcomes through flawed processes.
Generalised outcome being
a big
compliance with the Disability Discrimination Act.
Well, that's an important outcome. You asked me something like that before, and I said unequivocally government should be interested in improving housing quality, and I would say to the other question, yes, in making sure that housing is fit for occupation by disabled people. But those outcomes can be achieved in all sorts of ways, and they should not be achieved at the expense of people's process rights, because those process rights will inform the way that things can be done, possibly in a way that protects their security of tenure. So the idea of it just being a question of one big enormous balance, I want to submit to you.
Last question on that point, the process. Everyone's process rights individually or the process right collectively?
It's both. You have, if this were a planning issue involving 10,000 people in a suburb, I can say to you, as a former president of the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal, who had responsibility, that's the State Planning Tribunal, that would have been done through a planning panel. And anybody interested, individually and collectively, affected by the redevelopment would have had the entitlement to come and speak to that committee or to that planning panel. So both, individually and collectively.
Consent.
Seeking consent.
Right. Sorry.
Seeking consent. I'm not suggesting to you that a tenant has the right unreasonably to refuse consent to a development which may be necessary in the public interest for all sorts of reasons, the one that you've mentioned, sir, or the one that you mentioned before. But in order to create a situation in which there is some amelioration of the inequality of bargaining power between tenants on the one hand and government on the other, their consent should be genuinely sought.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'll hand over to Ms Payne.
They have not been made aware of Homes Victoria staff in relation to relocation, their rights. They've made it very clear to the committee. There's been a lack of trust, meaningful engagement, as you spoke to. You've also spoken about the history of stigma and discrimination against public housing residents in Victoria. And the mindset of the government is like that of a private landlord who has full powers of ownership over public housing. And it's been very clear the exercise of that power imbalance. Do you think the Tower redevelopment plan shows that same kind of attitude?
You're directing that question to me?
To anybody or both?
Bill?
The process that this committee has heard about in terms of the how the residents were advised about this decision demonstrates that a human rights approach is not being taken at the moment, and it indicates, unfortunately, that although the Charter has been around, will be 20 years next year, that human rights approach has not been adopted widely by government and by government institutions, and unfortunately it shows that Homes Victoria is not demonstrating a human rights-based approach, and that education is needed, a change of culture is needed in terms of how government approaches these issues, in terms of respecting people's rights when it's making such huge decisions as the one we see here, which impacts 10,000 people, and it impacts them on a very intimate and on a very personal level in terms of their security of their house and their living circumstance.
Great, thank you. Would you like to add anything?
I agree. And I otherwise rely on what's in my submission, in the article.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to thank everyone for the evidence today.
Individual capacity.
Yep. Richard Cameron, I was a convener of a major consortium who was trying to save the Hilton Street Towers. 76 professionals from the construction industry, and I was a convener. But however, apart from that, I'm just an architect and I'm representing myself.
No worries, thank you.
Well, just
Right, I'm an engineer. I graduated from the Bendigo School of Mines in 1956, not 1856, as somebody might have. And I subsequently joined CSIRO Soil Mechanics section. Well,
All right.
very few people in this room would know what that is, because when I got the job there, all my schoolmates reckoned that they were soil mechanics for blokes who worked in underground garages. But we're not here to tell any more jokes. But it was really a science within civil engineering pertaining to soil and rock and building foundations and things of that ilk, which was new. It really only emerged in the Second World War, particularly for the building of airstrips in a hurry in Europe and in Australia to some extent too, and so forth. But that's no great consequence. My boss was a bloke called Dick Parry, who was an Australian who graduated commission, hired our company to do soil foundation investigations for this new lot of flats, because it was the slum clearance program, which I'm sure you all read about.
And all these new apartments, or flats we used to call them then, of course, they've got a market now and gone. Gardens flats in Fitzroy recently, and inspected one of the flats. It was absolutely in perfect condition. And then I walked down the stairwell, and because you've got the bare walls, the concrete walls and that, and you can see if there's any cracking or faulting. There was nothing at all. And I've walked around outside of several buildings, the ones in Flemington, the ones in North Melbourne, and so on. So I've sort of bothered to have a bit of a look at those sort of things. So
Hi. Thanks very much for listeners for asking us to come and say hello.
Pleasure.
I'll basically give you a rough idea of who I am. Architect extraordinaire and retired from everything else apart from writing reports. The question, what I'm primarily interested in was the cost benefit, which in fact we're supposedly getting from this particular exercise of demolishing all the towers. And I was involved, as I mentioned, with the architect Peter McIntyre, who designed the brick towers, and he was a professor of architecture and a gold medalist, etc. He and Clements Langford were the first design and construct group that actually were appointed by the Housing Commission to actually work on the towers, etc. They were the last design and construct group to actually do it, because what they were doing is they were proving pretty closely that the traditional form of construction, etc., was highly economic and in fact quicker and more flexible than the system which the Housing Victoria group was actually using at the time. They didn't get another job, as you can obviously aware, because there was an enormous amount of capital tied up in the Holmesglen factory. However, Australia is the largest houses in the world. We, in fact, are the biggest consumer of housing space in area. Now, if we have a look at a very quick analysis with regard to the history of this particular exercise, Elgin Street and Nicholson Street Towers, they were vacated in 2022. And by the way, I do have hard copies of what I'm presenting, and I've also will give you a CD, USB for. So in 2022, the house, Elgin Street Tower was vacated. Reports were commissioned in January 22 from several consultants to say, look at this, look at that, look at the other, and they were. It ended up with a report by Hayballs to examine 4 design options. And what the fundamental thing was, that there was a certain brief which said you must increase the size of the rooms, you must do this, you must do that, etc., to meet our 2025 or 2022 standards of area. And when you actually look at that particular process, every bedroom which you add to a sustainable house, according to the government, requires 20 metres extra space. 20 metres extra space. Absolutely extraordinary. I remember we used to have 2 people in the bedroom. You now got to have bedroom plus bathrooms and all sorts of things. The actual area analysis really doesn't stack up. In 2021, the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing set up a Paving the Way Forward group to examine and form an assessment of a master plan for the future. This consultation, and predominantly in North Melbourne, this consultation continued till 2023 with the North Melbourne Residents Action Group and definitive plan outlined in 2022-23. It was reported on in June 2023. September 23, the federal and state government announced that the big build was to demolish all the build blocks, with Elgin and Nicholson Street first. Drawings and development data was issued by Homes Victoria in 2024, and I basically used those drawings and that information to assess the business case. Primary demolition of the towers commenced in 24, which is 4 months prior to the Heritage Council actually listening to my submission to protect the buildings.
I'm just just conscious of time, Richard, that's all. And
Sorry?
I'm conscious of time.
Oh, right, okay.
Apologies, I don't mean
No. Very quick. My research reveals that the demolition of the two towers and the replacement by the development proposed by the current architects will see a net increase of residents of 30 people. Not 240 houses, 30 people. Because what they did is they've actually made a whole lot of one-bedrooms and they've got rid of a whole lot of 3, 4s and 5 bedrooms, etc. So I've got a recommendation here. This inquiry immediately advises the Parliament of Victoria to pass a motion to pause the demolition and any further planning of the public and social housing proposed in the current policy of Housing Victoria regarding the demolition and replacement of the 44 public houses, and recommends the preparation and public release of an independent detailed cost-benefit study managed under the auspices of the Auditor-General. That's how serious I reckon this is. Now,
back and forth between the members, okay? Let's put my timer on. Okay, so, Richard, you mentioned the Elgin Towers there, Elgin Street Towers. Have you seen the condition report at all?
Have I seen a condition report?
Yeah.
I have seen 2 reports. I've seen one which analysed. No, I haven't seen a condition report. I've only been told that there's a leak in the sewerage.
That's all.
Right. With regard to condition report, I have read a report by building surveyors who, in fact, went through and looked at all the regulations and where things weren't so-called compliant.
My question really is getting to, why do you think the government is trying to cover it up?
Sorry?
Why do you think the government are trying to cover it up?
Well, that's a very loaded question, and I agree with you. I don't know why. But the critical thing is, that I believe that there is an agenda to actually get rid of them, no matter whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And that, in fact, when you look at the current situational status of the buildings, the only 2 things which are non-compliant are the staircase, which in fact is the width of a cigarette box narrower than current regulations. And the other thing is there is a potential for some soil acoustic treatment between the 2 floors, etc. The reason why there was a difference with regard to the stairs is that we metricated. And they decided to make it easier for the builders. Sorry, so instead of 3'4", they called it 1 metre. Well, that is the 37 millimetres, which in fact is the width of the staircase.
I've only got limited time, so I want to ask you another one. One of the other reasons that's been given for demolition is because the buildings don't meet current regulations and standards. One of those standards is to do with earthquake.
Earthquake. Australia is nominated as the low-risk earthquake zone in the world. In Melbourne, other than design and architectural team, yes.
Terrific, thank you. So I just want to touch on the staircase comment, because we've been into the Elgin Street Tower.
Sorry?
The staircase comment you made. Yeah. That's an extremely narrow staircase. A matchbox isn't going to allow people to pass on the stairwell. And that's what the current standard is it not?
So the current standard says that it should be a metre wide. Mm-hmm. The standard which it was built to is 973. Mm-hmm. That is 25 or 35 millimetres. So it complies within that much.
But it doesn't allow people to pass in the staircase.
Sorry,
which is a safety risk.
With respect, the extra 1.5 metres depends on how large you are.
Fair enough.
Right. So,
to a group of politicians who probably want to start working in that space. Not all of us. Myself, perhaps. But okay, thank you. So it wouldn't be enough to in the Elgin Street Towers.
In fact, if you have a look, there aren't too many people that get caught in staircases, etc., which are in fact to the standard which was actually throughout Australia until 1974.
But I guess that's the point, isn't it? It's the standards that might have been okay at that time, but the standards have changed.
We haven't changed that much.
So can I ask why, in your view, were the towers built without adequate heating or cooling for residents?
What was the question?
Well,
Why were they built without adequate heating or cooling? Now, I grant you we've had global warming, things are much worse.
with respect, what do you call adequate cooling and heating?
Well, we've had numerous witnesses at this inquiry who are residents complain about how hot their apartments are for extended periods, even after the heat wave has ended, and also about the reverse in winter, that it's freezing cold. So clearly it's inadequate. There is, as you're probably aware, a cooling program being rolled out across the towers. Why was this not done at the time, in your view?
There are two answers to that. First of all, there is heating throughout, which in fact is hydronic heating. And with regard to cooling, you turn it off, obviously. With the proposal that we're looking at with the refurbishment, we are proposing within our costings for split system air conditioning in every one of the retained.
And why wasn't that done at the time? Why wasn't a cooling method?
I can't think you very clearly.
Apologies.
Sorry, I'm a bit...
No, that's probably
better,
my
thank
fault.
you.
Why wasn't adequate cooling put in the towers
Mate,
when they were built?
in 1960, we couldn't spell air conditioning. I mean, don't you realise this? We didn't have heating. I live in a house built in 1870. It's 150-something years old. It's got, in Parkville, as all the houses in Parkville were in a suburban Melbourne.
So how do you...
They didn't know. There was no such word. There was heating. We had open fireplaces. And that's what we built. In 100 years, there'll be something different to what you're talking about now. I mean, I think that question, can you see, they didn't...
Look, I can, but there's been a lot of difficulties in applying newer methods and newer standards into their...
No one had air conditioning. I haven't got air conditioning in my house. I've got hydronic heating. In Melbourne, you get 10 hot days a year, for God's sake. You don't need air conditioning.
Well, I'd say, based on evidence we've heard from
you're a
softie tenants, I think many of them do need air conditioning.
I was born in the valley, mate. Air conditioning,
but I'll take your
sleeping on the veranda.
comment that they don't. I might leave that there. In terms of disability access and against, I acknowledge standards have changed, but I would say it's been a good thing.
Just keep going and finish this point.
What considerations, if any, were made for disability access at
which
building? Because it seems that the buildings are structurally not capable of supporting many people who have physical impairments.
I'm sorry, I
can't hear you.
I can't hear you. Could pull the microphone over. Is it on? Maybe it's not on.
It is on. He asked about what provisions were made for disability access in the building.
Well, I have no idea, because that word didn't exist in our vocabulary in 1960 either.
So all those things that aren't suitable for the modern age,
I'm sorry?
You're acknowledging that these things weren't put in place. And
correct.
And I accept that there were different standards, but that's the point, isn't it? That we need public housing that's actually up to scratch for people who live in.
Yes, no argument.
Yeah.
But the structure of these buildings...
What we're basically saying is that we can refurbish the existing, we can increase the width of access for disability, we can actually provide all of the requirements for the Disability Act for the refurbishment, and it costs 1/5 of what it costs to build in the new one.
And how do you increase the stairwells?
Sorry, I've got to go there.
My time is
With
up.
due respect, the stairwells are in fact allowable under the law that, in fact, if you are looking at refurbishing things, previous regulations, etc., and previous regulations are in fact still valid.
I'm going to go to Dr. Heath now, who's going to start her line of questioning.
Okay.
Yes, you're
Yeah,
clear.
thank you so much for coming in and for your presentation. Jerry, I just wanted to ask you around the earthquake risk. It was actually a New Zealand consultancy that was used to do this condition report. How relevant do you think that is? And I'm going to ask two questions in one, I guess. Also, the government plans to have people in the housing towers for another 6 years. Given that there's this so-called earthquake risk, how would you handle that? And what's your view on the earthquake risk?
Well, I think it was answered by my colleague here, and you answered that in some questions you might care to do, because I'm not a structural engineer, I'm a geotechnical engineer. I'm sorry that I'm not trying to escape from the question, but we were involved, and I guess I'm not the right person to have here in a way, but because I had the personal involvement, I'm probably the only one still alive that was involved in the building of them, and we did the foundation building. Sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you. Do you?
I think that Jerry basically covered. But as I said, Australia is in fact at one of the lowest risk in earthquakes, right? And just to believe that a New Zealand earthquake specialist who knows the difference between extreme earthquakes in New Zealand and low here, etc., would use his professional judgment and say low risk, 50 years, 10%, that's fair enough, etc. Right? And the other thing is that we just got no matter where we are, even in New Zealand, they have a risk of earthquakes, and they design to a risk of earthquakes. It doesn't guarantee that the buildings are going to stand up.
Thank you.
It reduces the risk, and it's managing the risk which is the critical thing, and that's where we believe that the work which is actually being done and the work which can be done in the refurbishment will in fact cover that particular problem.
Amazing, thank you. You provided a quantity survey on the cost of rebuilding or refurbishing the towers. So the report says that the rebuild is, what's this, square metres? It would cost around $60 million, but make safe for earthquake, you would only need to spend 3.7% of that figure.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you, or does that sound feasible?
It's a little bit misleading what was actually said in the where you got that information, because the whole of the structure is designed such that you've got the columns, beams and the slabs, etc., which in fact are designed to work in tandem with each other to resist the quakes. And therefore, you're up to nearly 20% of the total cost of the building in the design phase to look at manipulating and managing, increasing slides of sizes, etc., for earthquake conditions. So it's not 3%, it's getting closer to 20%. It basically is a revised structural design looking at the three dimensions rather than just what's involved in you're putting an extra bit of this here and extra columns here, etc., etc. So it is far, far more than 3%.
Okay, thank you.
It's just the definition which is in the quantity survey.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much, Richard.
That's all right.
I'll go Miss Grey Barberia. Now go to Miss Hermans.
Thank you, and thank you so much for coming in. Based on the evidence provided in the quantity surveying report, do you believe that all the modern access and safety issues required in the building could be easily retrofitted to meet modern standards?
Correct, except with respect to Michael's query, I can't add 3.5 inches or whatever it was to a staircase. That's the only thing I believe which is a problem.
Okay, so it's about 3.5 inches.
Well, it's about the width of a cigarette packet, yes.
Sure. Okay.
And in fact, that is less the actual handrail distance where you put your handrail. So you're talking about that much different in reality.
Thank you. Do you, if properly maintained, like regular maintenance, and in some cases that hasn't been happening since the announcement in 2023, how long do you think these towers could be occupied?
How long will they last? Well, what we're proposing is to refurbish them to a brand new.
Yep.
Under our costings, etc., which can be done for about a quarter of the price. So if it gets to brand new, it's exactly the same as building a brand new one, and I'm suggesting that they will last for 50 years.
Another 50 years. All right, put it this way. If they demolished and rebuilt, is that the best use of our taxpayers? Yes. That's the worst.
If you do a carbon analysis, and it's been done in the report by this, whatever they call themselves, office, it's frightening.
So
and we get continuously from all governments, and appropriately so, I'm not knocking it, that we have to be conscious of climate change. Of course we do. And we've got to cut our emissions. And to go and say they're going to do this, it's absolutely sinful. If you read the numbers, it's frightening. And it is quite ludicrous. In fact, and you've probably read in that report of Office, they had 4 cases, one in Glasgow, one in Switzerland, one in London and one in Germany, of refurbished towers, very similar to these, almost identical to these, have been done incredibly successfully in relatively recent. Have you read that?
Yeah. So thank you for that. And I guess then the question is, in terms of the Elgin Towers, they were relocated due to problems with the mains water supply in 2021. And then 18 months later it was decided to demolish the buildings. But with your knowledge of the industry, and this could go to Richard as well, could the Elgin Towers and other 42 public housing towers have their water pipes and sewage systems repaired for a lot less than emptying and demolishing the buildings?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it'd be a shame if our
the Elgin Towers, because the whole of the inside is all brickwork. We just take the edge of the services shaft off the brickwork. We then relay all of the pipes in that, and we fill it up again.
All right, we're going to have to.
That's been allowed for, and all our costs are
interested in the. Would you say the geotechnical knowledge has advanced since those towers were built?
Well, of course, everything's advanced every day. Even if you read this morning's paper, football coaching has improved too, but I don't think the coach of Melbourne would agree with you. But of course, but it's minute.
Architectural knowledge as well, just with Richard, that there's also been advancements in architectural knowledge since the towers were built as well.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand.
Ms. Ermacore is asking you if you'd agree that there's advancements in architectural knowledge. Sorry for paraphrasing, but I think since the towers were built.
Much advanced in architectural knowledge.
Yeah.
Technology obviously has changed. People have changed, etc., so therefore we've adopted. With regard to actually understanding the environment that people want to live in, their requirements for their comfortable accommodation, it's exactly the same as it was 50 years ago. We, in fact, now use technology to gently massage it better.
Yes, I think
as I said, with regard to public housing, we're looking at shelter, sustenance and safety, and they're the fundamental things we have to look after. Look after the domestic violence people, look after those people. This doesn't do that.
So I also want to ask, just in terms of the current condition in relation to the sewerage, do you acknowledge that the sewerage systems are failing at the moment?
Well, the answer to that is that they're not maintained.
And the staircase differences in standards from the past to today, the reason for those differences, what's the reason for those differences?
Well, with regard to the sewage, etc., the differences don't exist because it's exactly the same. It's still a 4-inch.
Stairwell.
Sorry? With regard to the stairwell, as I said, we in fact have an allowance in our legislation that if you do less than 25% of a building's restoration, you are allowed to use the old regulations to do it, which therefore endorses the fact that the old regulations are sufficient to look after the escape. Our law says it. It's okay.
With the community values and the definition of what is adequate housing to meet human rights, they've changed as well since the 1960s, along with the technological knowledge around heating, cooling, and the basic functionality of multi-dwellings. So do you acknowledge that new information and new knowledge is expected?
Yes, they're correct. However, whether in fact it is necessary, if they are guidelines, most of these things, right? They are not mandatory. And they are guidelines to determine, or say that if you want a better existence, you want a better this, that and the other, fine. However, I have some friends who in fact are part and parcel of a group who go and look after the homeless, and I am sure that Jojo, the little lady who lives under Princess Bridge, is not really worried about an extra 2 metres in her bedroom, because she in fact sleeps in the front foyer of an office building outside, and has done for 2 years.
I'm going to have to throw to...
So water doesn't get in. But sometimes when the builders aren't careless, the Rio gets displaced and it's bordering on the edge. Water gets into the Rio, rusts it, the steel rust that expands and splits the concrete.
Oh, there's a concrete line.
So it's pretty simple. So all you have to do is get in a bloke with an angle grinder and a jackhammer, break out that section, put in new Rio, and put in high strength epoxy concretes, and it's a piece of cake.
Very simple.
It's happening continuously.
I've got just one further question, and Richard, I might bring you in for this one. Some of the logic we've been hearing from the government through this process around things like changes in standards over time, over the years, if we applied that logic to other buildings of similar or older age in Melbourne, roughly to an estimate, what proportion of buildings would need to be demolished across Melbourne? Can you give some examples? Like, what about the building we're in now?
My house that I'm happy
Linda Street Station.
Meet the standards. Yeah. Obviously. And that would account for probably 20 or 30% of the buildings in Melbourne.
And yet these buildings we don't knock down.
I totally agree with
Well, my house will stand for another 150 years. It's perfect.
Just to confirm, did you say 90%?
Of that order, yes.
Yeah, wow.
Percentage.
I mean, the interesting thing is that the size of various rooms and various things in Europe are far, far smaller than here, and yet they're not complaining about the fact that it's substandard living.
So in that case,
Australia has an enormous appetite for grandeur, and that's the problem.
We've got the space to do it.
And we've got the space.
can I ask, in that case then, why do you think the government would choose to demolish any of the towers, let alone all of them, prior to their expected end of life?
You tell me. We should be asking you that question. How would we know?
Fair enough. Thank you.
We're out
That's
of
my
time,
time.
I'm afraid.
And I think this is one of the things which we really do believe. We believe an inquiry should be held into this. We believe a business case should be made, and all of the assumptions which have been prepared by the government at the present time tested by independent people. Because at the moment, we have grave difficulties in understanding the logic and the rationale as to why this particular course is being done. And we are looking at, over the next 10 years, increasing the actual debt of the public housing over $6 billion because of inflation as well.
Gentlemen, I've got to finish it up there, I'm afraid. So, I'll start off. I guess one of the big questions that has been in this inquiry is the justification of the demolition as opposed to refurbishment. What has the department used to justify the demolition as opposed to refurbishment options? For me. So, Homes Victoria, as you know, is the asset owner and manager of all 44 towers, and a core part of our role is to make sure that we have deep knowledge of the current building condition and to make sure we plan for their maintenance. This means we constantly consider, right across the portfolio, strategies for asset management. In terms of the towers and planning or cost-benefit analysis, it is the case that specific work was undertaken. On the 29th of June 2024, the Attorney-General tabled 12 documents in response to the Legislative Council's resolution on the 15th of November 2023. These documents include reports from approval systems, Ernst & Young, Hayball, Urbis and Super Housing Partnerships. They are some of the many reports that were procured and considered. At the same time, the Attorney-General made a claim of executive privilege in relation to 146 documents in full. The committee may well have seen this document list. I am not able to discuss with you the nature of or contents of these documents. In a related event on 10th of February 2025, Justice Keogh ruled that the 29 Cabinet submission documents are immune from disclosure. He noted that the immunity of the Cabinet submission documents should be maintained pursuant to Section 130 and 131A of the Evidence Act. Sorry, I'm sure you understood that I had to actually read that. Yeah. So what's the justification for it then? Well, I'll certainly go through the justification, and Mr. McCurry, who looks after our asset management, I'm sure can go into more detail. As the presentation outlined, there are a number of issues with the properties. Not only inherent design and construction flaws, they've reached the end of their design life. They were designed to run for about 50 years. So if that's the case, can you provide this committee with evidence of that? I think that statement that I just read to you was my response to that question. So that's a no. I can add no further
but what I just read in response to that question.
Part of the problem we have is that we haven't been given any evidence by anyone from government as to why these towers should have been demolished as opposed to refurb or other various sort of options. Now, basically you're saying that can't be provided from you. Who can it be provided by then?
My understanding is the Attorney-General is the only one empowered to make that decision.
So the Attorney-General, not even the Housing Minister, can't provide it?
The advice I've got is no.
So you alluded to some documents, I think it was from Ernst & Young and PwC, is that correct?
I didn't say PwC, but Ernst & Young, yeah.
Ernst & Young, and they undertook a business case, is that correct?
Yeah, my understanding is, and some of those were done, in fact, most of those were done before I joined Homesvic 2 years ago, but my understanding that one looked at whatever commercial opportunities were available at the bottom of towers.
So then, sorry, can you just repeat that again? I just missed that.
Supermarkets, commercial leasing opportunities, how you would best utilise those sites. That, my understanding, is that the Ernst & Young report focused on that.
Are you able to provide the committee with a copy of that report?
I think those reports I've listed have already been provided.
Joe, got it here if you want.
Yeah.
Oh, good, thanks. Sorry, I must have missed that one.
That's okay.
So I guess in terms of what the plan is for the towers then, is that the green space around the towers is obviously incredibly important to the local community. Is it the intent through these processes that although the green space is going to be, for a better term, commercialised?
No, I don't think so, and that's why I just wanted to sort of deal with that Ernst & Young report. That was certainly commissioned some time ago. We are responsible for delivering housing. My prime responsibility is not about trying to commercialise sites. Any amenities that we would provide on those sites would be in consultation with council, community. We have had a lot of calls, particularly in Flemington. We're hearing already that people would like an Aldi supermarket in the bottom of whatever's redeveloped. They don't intend not to commercialise the sites, no.
Do you know to what degree there will be an increase in commercialised premises on the sites compared to what is there now?
Look, I couldn't comment other than to say it would be minimal. It is not at any means the intent of the redevelopment.
So we're not going to see, for example, 2 or 3 stories of shops like, geez, I don't know, super cheap Bordeaux or Big W Subways, and then towers above that for residents?
Well, again, I've got no way of answering that question explicitly because it's a 30-year program and governments ultimately make those decisions, but I can say that it is not the intent in any way, shape or form to turn these into what was colloquially known in the building industry as shop-top housing. That is not the intent. Any amenity that would be provided as part of redevelopment would have to be complementary and really as part of a community consultation and working with councils.
Okay. Have you personally cited the cost-benefit analysis of the redevelopment versus the demolition of towers? So what I'm trying to say is, have you personally seen the document that justifies the demolition of the towers versus retrofitting or other options?
Yes, and again, I've got to be very careful that I don't allude to documents which the Attorney-General's claim privilege on, but yes, I think I've demonstrated that a variety of reports were developed that form part of the decision-making process by government.
Okay, so you've seen the reports. Apart from demolition, other options that could have been explored may have included things like retrofitting the towers or various versions of that. Is that fair to say?
That would have been considered.
Yeah.
So that would have been considered as one of the options you put against.
Sorry?
That would have been considered. The holding of the towers and retrofitting was one of the options to be considered, yes.
It would have been?
Yes.
Okay. What made it so that it wasn't the preferred option?
Well, if I go back to, when we took you around the towers, these towers have a number of issues that are a function of their age and their inherent building characteristics and design that they went through. What we have over time is not only an escalating maintenance regime, because we've got concrete spalling which we cannot reverse or arrest, and we've got plant life cycles that we need to go through in terms of replacing. We've got 20 kilometres of sewers that will need to be replaced as we go through those stacks in order to retain them. And if we are to retain them and do a deep retrofit invest in a structure that has got a remaining life of a limited number of years.
Okay, if that is the case then, and the evidence that you have seen in front of you on the report justifies that, why won't the department release that to the public so we can all see it for ourselves?
I can add no further than the statement that I read earlier.
Because as you would have known, there's been a plethora of witnesses come forward and say, look, we can retrofit this, we can do this for a fraction of the price, get a similar outcome, if not better. Wouldn't it just be prudent to say, look, here's our evidence base here, this is the decision that we have come to because of what we have been presented in the reports that you've received? That would completely take away the perception that exists in the community at the moment. These towers can be retrofitted. That would be a fair thing to say, surely.
I think the statement that I've said stands to answer that question. We can certainly go into some of the questions you've asked. I'll give you one clear example. There's been a number of organisations that have recommended that we put balconies, verandas, private open spaces onto the towers. That had been tried some years ago. The cost to do one of those verandas, around 4.5 square metres, works out to be about $100,000 a square metre, 10 times the cost of a rebuild. And that's assuming that the actual concrete structures can support those, and there's a big question mark about that. That's just one of the
greatest of respect. I'm not asking about balconies. I'm just asking about retrofitting the current building, as many people have spoken about, and the Parliament. Hold on, it's my questions. And the fact of the matter is that that information is not being released publicly. I can't, and no one can verify one way or another if the claims being made are actually standing up or not. They're not subject to scrutiny.
I can add no more to that specific question other than the statement that I have read. We're very happy to answer specific questions about some of the elements which we can go through in detail, but the actual response and what can be provided, I've read that statement from the department.
My time's up, so I'll hand it over to Mr. Batchelor first.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks all of you for coming along. I want to go to Mr. Newport and Mr. Macquarie, to Elgin Street, and what happened in Elgin Street in the two towers there in late 2022 that required the buildings to be evacuated. If you could take the committee through what happened, the evacuation that was required, and take us through what happened in those first two towers.
Given that it happened shortly before I joined Homes Victoria, I think it's probably best poised to answer that question.
At Elgin Street, the copper sewer stacks, which have contained inside 3 risers in the buildings, were failing and leaking raw sewage down the walls of the apartments, down into the electrical substation at the base. That building has got 3 risers which share electricity and water, and those are not a good combination. The only way to access those risers, so when we showed you around the high-rise towers, we were able to open and see the pipes, and those were contained internally at the back of bathrooms. The only way to actually access those, to repair those pipes, is to partially demolish the bathrooms. In doing so, that would incur a cost of about $8 million per tower to break in and replace those. The towers, when you go through and then retrofitting those back to ensure that we have that separation around risers and making them closer to being code compliant, because under national construction regulation we try to bring those up to standards, and we know we can't, and the question is, can we get reasonable dispensations? Well, we couldn't necessarily get the dispensation, but when you go through the economics of retrofitting those towers versus that of a new build, then the economics for those work out that it's line ball, and you may as well invest in a new build with 60, 70 years of life rather than a remaining tower with 20 years left in the structure. So that could fully code compliant because they've got issues around ceiling heights, thin floor slabs around noise and fire, the ventilation systems were poor, the fire stairwells are narrow and not code compliant. And the question we asked them on the approval systems is, certificate of occupancy enhances, we would struggle to do that.
So you'd struggle to get a certificate of occupancy because of non-compliance with...
Because of the non-compliance, we would have to work around the current structure to do that. So while we could reconfigure rooms and get the risers correct, that comes at a cost, but certain things around ceiling heights, noise issues, we wouldn't be able to overcome.
Right. And what happened to the residents who were living there? And how long did it... Presumably they had to be moved. How long did that take?
Again, that was just before my time when I arrived. I think we had 2 residents in place. That had been a program that had happened over a number of, a long period of time, over a number of months.
Right, okay.
2 of the 12 documents that were released from approval systems, one of them relating to Melbourne Road, South Yarra, does not conclude that demolition is the only option. In fact, it recommends that a cost-benefit analysis be undertaken to assess the feasibility of upgrading the building. So my question to you is, did that cost analysis ever take place?
I might bow to Martin on that particular instance, but we have already assessed it's the fact that work was done. But Martin, you might want to add something on that.
Sorry, did you say yes, that cost analysis did take place?
Subject to being corrected by Martin on that particular tower.
We would have done costs for that tower. We would have done costs based on a set of towers by typology, by sampling, but individual towers, we understand the life cycle of the lifts, the condition of...
Just need an answer, yes or no. With regards to Melbourne Road, South Yarra, did you conduct a cost-benefit analysis? Did it ever take place?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
If so, will you release it? Are you going to make that publicly available to the committee and to the Victorian public?
Okay. I've got a statement that I've already read that I think addresses that question.
So are you saying this cost-benefit analysis falls under executive privilege?
I'm saying that I've read a statement that explains the position of the government.
Can I ask why did the government continue with this demolition without doing the cost-benefit
procurement for the next set of the project? So I hope you don't mind. I think we would just have to check on that one.
And you're happy to come back to the committee on that?
I will check what we can release under those conditions, yes.
Thank you. These loans are paid back through rents. The redevelopment of the first 2 towers at Flemington was essentially an expansion of the ground lease model 1 contract to building communities who hold both other ground lease model contracts in Victoria. We understand that there was no open tender. Can you confirm that, yes or no?
I can confirm that that yes, building communities, I've got to be very careful what I say here. We are currently in negotiations with building communities about extending that existing contract.
So are you saying there was no tender or there was an open tender?
I'm saying that we're looking to extend the existing contract.
What probity checks were undertaken to ensure this decision met procurement and value for money standards?
The specifics we would have to respond, but I'm assured, in fact I know that I'm assured that we had all relevant probity and procurement checks performed.
For example, 5,000 square metres of commercial offices and shop fronts along Gertrude and Brunswick streets at the Atherton Gardens estate in Fitzroy. Can you tell me why the government commissioned detailed commercial real estate analysis for estates across 8 public housing sites, but no studies or cost analysis on feasibility and other viable options like retrofitting?
I'm pretty certain that I've addressed that in terms of, in fact I have addressed that in terms of the refurbishment we've categorically said here today, and I'm under oath as well in a court case and said yes, of course that work was done, and explained why we were not at liberty to share that. In terms of the commercial work, that was commissioned some years ago, and I've spoken to the intent now. What work was commissioned a number of years ago, I can't speak to the mind of previous leadership. All I can say is that I'm imagining they were having a look and seeing what were the feasibilities for each site.
Okay. And just lastly, because I think investigation into the commercial potential of these towers, then the impact on the people who live in them.
Oh, I'm sorry, I categorically reject that that's the case.
It's my time. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much.
When she spoke about the open tender, you answered, we're extending the current contract, when the truth is, the fact is that there was no open tender.
there was a full-blown, and obviously the original ground lease model procurement was before my time, but it is certainly deemed the most commercially viable and sensible way would be to continue under the current agreement. We're in construction right now on the next phase for the ground lease model. And it's
was there an open tender? That's the question. It's a yes or no.
The original contract, absolutely.
Original contract, okay. In terms of the EY business case and the reasons it's not being released, is it because there's advice within that the report that the government's ignoring and not following?
My understanding is the Ernst & Young work was one of the documents that were tabled.
Is there costs in the reports that you're withholding that have not been disclosed?
I would have to check on some of the specifics of that before I categorically answer that, but to the best of my knowledge, no, I think that report was released in full, but can you please, we can check on that one.
One of the reasons that the government's advisors believe that the towers are an earthquake risk, and this is one of the reasons that you are taking the steps that you're taking. However, it's going to be 26 years before the project is finished. So how do you justify, if that is the truth and that is factual, how do you justify having Victorian residents in an earthquake risk for 26 years?
I think whether you see our submission, the Secretary's presentation.
That's right, you can answer now, yeah. You can answer it now.
Well, sorry, what I was about to say is that whether it's in that presentation, our submission, we've been extremely clear about all of the factors that were taken into account in terms of the decision, and seismic and the lack of compliance with today's seismic standards is certainly one of the factors that we've needed to take into account. I would just say, just to avoid any sort of panic for anybody, because we really don't want to do that, is that the homes, the apartments are, in terms of, with notwithstanding what Martin talked about in terms of spalling, what have you, they're as safe today as the day they were built. So we do not want to unnecessarily panic people about anything like that. We've talked about the unique way that these buildings were designed and built in terms of structural self-supporting panels, and that certainly adds to one of those issues. But it is a wide range of factors that have determined the government's decision, not just one single factor.
Does the government have a list of all the towers and why they need to be knocked down in the stated timeframes?
The timeframes right across the 28-year program in terms of each tower has not yet been developed. As you can imagine, this is a generational renewal program. Some of the reasons, or the main reasons why the order is determined, there is no question asset condition is one of those elements. One of the other elements, the major element, is we're determined to keep communities close together. So when readily available newly built stock like Flemington is being delivered within 100 metres of the existing site, that is one of the main reasons why we will determine the order for which these are redeveloped.
The answer to that question is yes or no?
You'll have to repeat the question.
Does the government have a list of all the towers and why they need to be knocked down in the stated timeframes?
Of course, we have a list of the towers, the order in which we'll do the redevelopment. The government has announced the first.
Yes or no?
The government has announced the first two tranches. So the answer to your question is the entire program has not been developed over the 28 years in terms of exactly which towers. That's being developed as each tranche is announced.
You mentioned about the of keeping communities together.
Yeah.
How many private rental properties have been secured to house the displaced residents?
Okay. So I don't have it specifically for the program. Danny's probably got the complete statistics in terms of how many total homes last year Homes Victoria acquired and leased.
Yeah, I didn't hear what you said.
No, it's all right, sir.
Sorry, yeah.
Thank you. I can advise across the program the majority of people have moved into existing homes, so public or community housing, and people get to choose whether it's public or community or both, so we look based on their preferences. So of the households that have moved, a very small proportion have been purchased or leased homes. So let me just get this data for you.
Thanks, and just to refresh your memory is how many private rentals have been.
Yeah, of course. So
can I just point out that when you say private rentals, so once we sign a head lease agreement with an owner, obviously they then become public.
Yes, so, but what I'm asking is we're in the middle of a housing crisis, so just to...
We understand and we'll provide the information, but I just wanted to make sure people understand that they become public housing under our responsibility once we sign the lease.
Of course, but the reason I'm asking is Victoria's in the midst of a housing crisis, and in order to, it doesn't matter who has it after the contract's signed, but in order to move people, you have to take a property out of the private market. What I'm asking is how many?
Sure, of course. Advisors of the 24th of July, 408 households had moved, and this is namely in tranche 1. 213 of those households had moved to nearby housing at Victoria Street or Abbotsford Street. 6 households had moved to other community housing, and 189 households had moved to public housing. To get to your particular question, 117 had moved to existing, what we call rental general stock or public housing, and then 72 had moved to purchase or leased homes, which is 17% of all households moved. I can also advise you that across last year, Homes Victoria has always purchased homes out of the private market, but we do it very sparingly. So across our acquisitions last year or our additions last year, it was less than 7%. Less than 7%. And we do it for a particular reason. People have particular needs and preferences, and sometimes we need to purchase that home to get it to meet their needs. Often a disability need, we will purchase a home or we will lease a home. We do it often in the Transitional Housing Management Program, which is a program that supports people experiencing homelessness. Those people are really struggling to access private rental housing, so by us assuming the role of landlord, we are able to head lease the property and then that person gets access. So we do it very sparingly and very carefully, and we've been doing it for a long time.
Thank you. What's been the cost of those purchases?
We can absolutely share that information with you. We buy things at value at general value, so we are very, very careful about how we purchase. We follow purchasing guidelines from the value at general, and we test value before we're able to purchase anything, including at auction.
Thank you. In terms of the documents that aren't being released, I just want to, we've been ordered to do this by the Parliament. It's the use of public land. It's publicly owned. We're using public money. Do you believe that the public have a right to transparency from the government with this?
I think the best way that I can answer that question is it's not our place as public servants to comment on the policy of the government or the actions of the government. It's my job there to read that statement today. I couldn't have been any clearer in terms of the role and flexibility that we have.
There's one of the reasons that you brought up before was that there's a need for larger homes. However, there's going to be less bedrooms, isn't there?
No, that's not the case. And bearing in mind that bedroom configuration has only been decided for the very first Elgin Towers, the replacement of red bricks. And without all trying to sound like a clairvoyant, I did anticipate that we would get this question. In Carlton, the existing bedroom count is 392. The new bedroom count will be 430.
In what time frame?
That's the first towers that's been redeveloped, so that'll be finished in about 3 years.
Okay. Right.
Of the first site at Flemington have already been signed engaging Icon Construction. Now, given Icon is at the centre of a $122 million cost blowout and legal dispute over the North Sydney Olympic Pool redevelopment, what safeguards are in place to protect Victorian taxpayers from similar blowouts?
I think you might be alluding to the contract with Icon with the consortia would be for the buildings that are currently under construction, not the announced towers. So that was part of the original ground lease model work. So the contract, my understanding, for the construction, well, in fact, they cannot possibly have been signed for the first tranche of the towers because the negotiations on the extension of the contract have not.
I understand they've been announced in a media release by the Housing Minister.
That's the current tower that's under construction, it's not the future towers.
Right, but anyway, my question related to what safeguards are in place to protect taxpayers from similar blowouts. Can you answer the question?
With the exception of some rise and fall and escalations with regards to some building costs, they're effectively a fixed term contract to the best of my knowledge. So the best protection that can be had there is that cost blowouts by builders are the builder's responsibility, not the responsibility, certainly not the responsibility of the taxpayer.
Okay, so you would categorically say Victorian taxpayers are protected from blowouts like that, which we're seeing in North Sydney?
In where, sorry?
In North Sydney.
I can't comment on a... I mean, I probably could, given where I've originally come from, but I'm not able to comment on a project delivered in another state.
But a company engaged for Victoria, so I would expect some commentary to be available.
Was it a swimming pool?
It's not your time.
Yeah, I think the best way for me to answer the question, I'm unable to comment upon another project in another state. What I can say is whether it's a Homes Victoria direct contract or whether it's through a consortium, a ground lease model, those contracting arrangements, with the exception of rise and fall with particular building indices over time, cost of materials and labour, any blowouts associated with anything that, if you like, in other ways, the fault of the builder is there's protection in place in the contract for that.
Okay, so Supreme Court, that a decision was made and there are no documents, end quote, relating to the decision to demolish the towers at North Melbourne and Flemington. So I'll ask again, do you maintain your claim that you have documents that look at cost-benefit analysis of retrofitting all of the towers?
I maintain the statement that I read, and the answer is yes, that work was done, and yes, I have read the very limited purview that I have in terms of being able to share that work.
So were the government lawyers lying?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Were the government lawyers lying based on what they've said?
No, I think you'll probably find they were referring to the Human Rights Charter court case in terms of whether there was a separate documentation of the decision made versus what was encased in the cabinet process. I think that might be the decision that they're referring to.
Right. Do I still have time, or
you got about 2?
In terms
well, what I can tell you is the prevailing per square metre rate for apartments typically averages between $9,000 and $10,000 a square metre.
Yep, that's right. Yep, that's what I've got here. But we've heard that the modelling, that despite the modelling being around $9,000 per square metre, that this is increasing, even almost doubling to around $15,000. With the increase in cost, does the business case actually stack up?
Look, I've got to be very careful at the moment because we're in procurement for Carlton, which is probably the best indicator of what the current rates are. All I can say at this stage is we're not seeing any deviation from that current rate. I'm not Nostradamus, I don't know what the rates will be in years to come, but we've gone through a very unusual spike. I've been working in construction for nearly 30 years, and I think it's fair to say the last 3 or 4 years has been extremely abnormal. We wouldn't anticipate, nor any of the work that we've done anticipates, an increase of sort of 35% over the last 3 to 4 years. So we're assuming a more normal increase. But, again, I've got to be very careful because we're out there in procurement at the moment, and I don't want to be tipping my hand in terms of what budgets are to builders. But that 10,000 a square metre is around about the mark.
Okay, so, but given that we are a state where the costs of building materials are significant and not easy to access, wouldn't it be a better case, doesn't that provide a better case for refurbishment over a rebuild at this point in time?
No, typically refurbishment costs, renovation costs, and anybody who's done any renovation work themselves will know it can be 2 to 3 times the cost.
So just to sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Newport, but I am a person that's had to do renovations many times, and I wouldn't agree with you at all. And if we look at some of the transactions that have taken place in other nations, that isn't what the data is showing around the world. So we have, for instance, and we've heard about Switzerland, Belgium, France, all of them doing refurbishments in their buildings. Now I know that Mr. McCurry, you mentioned that the pipeline area for, say, sewage and water was hard to access because it was behind the bathroom. We have visited the towers, and we've actually seen that the way that is accessed was actually thought through by the architects, and there's actually a cupboard that allows access to these pipes. So it's not that they're not accessible.
So Mr. Evans, I think I was there when I showed you around. We extracted the sewer stacks through that little cupboard.
Yes.
You have to then replace 2.7 metres high, and that was only applied to the bathroom. There also is a sewer stack for the kitchen. When we talk about international precedents, and we go to international present around similar technologies, the large panel constructions, what you're seeing is people demonstrating to me, here's a reinforced concrete frame from the 1950s, which is of a different construction, which has got a durable structure on it, and you're able to retrofit. What we're seeing with these large panel constructions in places like Broadwater Farm in London, in Portsmouth and Somers Town, you've just seen Glasgow saying all 48 towers of the high-rise North Lanarkshire Council commit to demolishing all 48 of high-rise towers. Northern Ireland Housing Executive would take down all 33. The precedent is not to retain. The precedent is to demolish these types of towers. They are 50 to 60 years old with a design life of 50 years. The debate around retaining these when they are got durability issues.
Well, with all due respect, there are plenty of Australians living in much older homes, and it's all to do with maintenance. Now, these homes, the government. I'm sorry, it's my turn, and you have had your turn. The government has been negligent. This is the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing. Now, in terms of fairness, how fair is it to actually neglect these buildings and to not repair them and to not have the maintenance so that we can justify a rebuild? To me, that doesn't sound like it is actually fairness. It doesn't sound like it is looking after families, and it certainly doesn't sound. It's very difficult to understand the perspective of housing when we've talked about what vandalism on lifts as being one of the reasons why we need to have a new building with new lifts. Vandalism is going to occur in new builds as well. So this is not a cost that you can actually ignore.
If I can answer your questions, and I'll go back and I'll ignore the part about vandalism on lifts because that was a question about OPEX, not about capital. The maintenance regime that we have, we service our lifts fortnightly. We do our annual checks in line with our manufacturer recommendations on all our gas boiler systems. Our automatic doors are done 2 monthly. Our exit lighting is done 2 monthly. We go through and we check our sewer stack 6 weekly. The issues that you face is not an issue of maintenance. You face an issue with these towers around age and the fact that they have been in use for 50 years.
Yes.
When I showed you in the high-rise towers, the corridor, and we took the steel and crumpled it in my fingers, that is not an issue of maintenance. That is an issue inherent in that construction since the day it was built. That was a wall rendered with acrylic that still popped out. That is not an issue of maintenance. We are maintaining the centralised plant. We've updated all lifts. We've updated all the equipment. And to say this is a function of maintenance, I think that's a sophism.
No, I don't think so. I think that it's actually really unreasonable to think that you can't build an extra lift somewhere because you need to have something that's big enough to be able to have a stretcher on. It could be an external lift. There's plenty of buildings around the world with external lifts. To say that that we need to look at the costs, and one of the costs is because of vandalism on a lift, to me, you're not. The thing is, you're not providing the transparency of the documents, and so all we can go on is that you're saying it is more cost effective for us to rebuild than it is to refurbish, and we're not seeing this, and we're certainly not hearing that from people in the industry, that building and construction and architects are saying it is possible, and the thing that gets me is you are the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing, and we are putting a whole lot of people at risk of housing. Has the government thought about the increase of migration into this state and taken that into consideration with the development of these houses, given that you are relocating people, and without us having an increase of our housing and a substantial increase of housing being built at a rapid rate, we are going to have an increase of homelessness? How is this department preparing to help the people of Victoria with homes when it is not building them rapidly and is at the moment taking people out of their homes and relocating them, and there are people that don't want to leave? How are you actually taking in the consideration of our current homeless situation in Victoria? Who would like to answer that?
I will address that in terms of the specific claims in terms of the number of properties. Again, we can only speak about tranche 1. They are the only decisions that have been made in detail by the government. The next tranche has been announced.
Does that mean that there is a possibility for a change, that there may be a decision to not demolish?
No, No, the government has made a policy decision and we are implementing that decision. In terms of the number of properties, what I can speak to categorically is the first tranche. Now, the first tranche of properties at the moment have 699 homes of them all social. When the first tranche is finished, we will have 962 social and another 400 affordable. That's a 63% increase in social and affordable and a 38% just social to social. Your total number of properties when you roll market into there as well will be 1,748. That's a 150% increase on the amount of people that are currently living just on those sites. So yes, we are taking into account the increased demand. Certainly my remit is social, to an extent it's affordable. But that is, where there's a 63% increase in social and affordable, or 150% of the total number of homes, that is significant in tranche
It
one.
sounds significant, but in reality, the construction is not keeping up with the need. And we have the lowest public housing in the whole of Australia in terms of what we can access for people. So my question is, I have here that Homes Victoria has been going directly to real estate agents and builders, and they have been prepared to pay a 10% increase on the rent year on year. So how many houses have you secured this way, and have you modelled what impact this is going to have on the private sector rental and on the cost of, affordable housing per se?
You can finish I'll address some of those. Look, those claims being made with regards to that somehow we're paying overs. I think my deputy CEO has absolutely addressed those in terms of we're not making those sorts of promises. We're not able to make those sorts of promises. We can only pay the prevailing market rate, which is ultimately checked and decided by the Valuer General of Victoria.
I think the only other thing I'd add is just about homelessness. What you raise is something that's very, very dear to what we're trying to achieve at the same time as the high-rise redevelopment, and the way we're trying to address homelessness in this state. I'm happy to outline how we're trying to balance those objectives while also dealing with the condition of the towers. If that would be helpful for the committee, I'm very happy to talk through
Statistically, we would love to have the statistics.
I'm very happy to share those.
If we can see without...
I might take that on notice.
Very happy. I can outline it to any committee member during the hearing or afterwards, and where we're at with that, if that's helpful. Thank you.
Sure, I'm going to hand it over to Miss Emma Cora, who's online. So just if that's the case, how long do you know how this whole process will take? If it's 30 years, 40 years, then how do you know that if you haven't... You said you only do it tranche by tranche. How do you know how long it's going to take all up?
We know how long it takes to do relocations, we know how long it takes to do deconstruction or demolition, and we know how long it takes to build them. This is not the first time we've done this. Obviously the ground lease model is a classic example. We've got many years of experience of doing this, not on these particular sites, but the ground lease models are great examples of stuff that we have already done. So we do know that it's typically a 7 to 8 year from very first announcement to doors being opened.
Thank you. My last little bit, Tetris Capital, who are they?
And I can't talk about, we've done an expression.
Yeah, so it's so frustrating that you can barely talk about anything, because we're here to, and I'm just putting it out there, we're trying to get answers, and I appreciate to know.
To clarify, Carlton is an open tender process. North Melbourne will be an open tender. The issue about Flemington is the augmentation of the site and to keep the site curtailed to one provider because it's working for that site.
That's what Mr Newport said that he can't answer. And I just acknowledging that it is very frustrating that there's very little information that we...
All I'm saying is when you're in a live procurement mode, there is no way in the world that we can be talking about something that's out there in the market right now. Carlton has closed, and obviously I haven't seen the tender box with that, and North Melbourne, we expect the RFP, the request for proposal, we expect it to be started in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Mr. Galea.
Of coercion, because it has certainly come up, and there was a report, somebody that actually reported that basically get these people out of this building sort of mentality, whatever you have to do to get them to sign to move out, that there was that that there was that sort of attitude, that sort of pressure that was being put onto people that were perhaps having to be the go-between, where the relocation for these particular individuals and families would be. Have you not? You're saying that from what I'm hearing, that you've not heard a single instance or situation, or not heard from any of these organisations that have given evidence over the period of the hearing to anything of that nature, of people feeling regret that they felt that they had been coerced, that they'd signed something they don't feel comfortable with.
I'm hearing the evidence and I'm really taking account of it and trying to delve under it, and absolutely take that evidence really seriously, and need to make sure that how we're operating. What I do is oversight the cases myself as well, and understand where resident needs are at, and I think about it with the team, or we think about, is that right? Is that going to suit the school? Is that a bit too fun? Like we look with people's needs and preferences and really try to meet their needs. So I think the care and attention, we are absolutely trying to take it. If there is any issues, we will address it. Yeah.
Absolutely not the feedback that we have been getting. And so have you, in terms of the cost versus benefit of demolishing the towers versus retrofit and renovation, have you been directed, any of you, to hide any cost-benefit analysis?
No, absolutely not. I think my statement, the department statement, stands for itself.
Do you think that the public have a right to know the cost analysis benefits, and because this is public land, it has been public land, it belongs to the people, not just to the individuals from the departments who make the decisions, and to the executive directors, with all due respect. It is public land. Do you think that people are entitled to know the cost benefits of refurbishing versus a complete demolition and reconstruction?
I guess I'd just reiterate, we've come to the committee to answer the questions within the parameters that we work in the public service, and we are not able to provide the information, and we need to be bound by the rules, just like you do on the other side of the table as well. So
understand. Appreciate that. So then, this is the last thing, right? These towers are actually the largest assets that this state owns. Right? This is the last of our large assets in the state of Victoria. We don't have a lot left. So when this is sold off, there's not a lot left in Victoria. Right? And we understand there's a lot of debt. But do you think the taxpayer deserves to know this information, given that this is our largest, or one of our largest assets left in the state?
Nothing's been sold.
I understand you're being told you can't, but do you think they should have that right?
Let me probably address the premise of that question. And the first premise is that land is being sold. And again, I would just caution that I'm only able to comment upon government decisions that have already been made. But out of the 5 towers that are being delivered, in all instances, they'll remain in the ownership of Homes Victoria. 2 run as public, 3 run as ground lease model, but all will be owned. I'm not able to comment on anything else, so I think the premise that they're being sold, I would also point out that they represent about 10%, a not insignificant number, but represents about 10% of the asset base of Homes Victoria. So it is not, I don't necessarily accept that it's the largest asset base that we have. We have $37 billion in assets.
We do have to move on to Ms. Emma Cron, I'm afraid.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Harriet Shing, Member of the Legislative Council and Minister for Housing and Building Development, Victoria Precincts and the Suburban Rail Loop.
Thank you. Now, I understand we've got about 5 minutes for a presentation, then we'll go to questions. So welcome, Minister, and hand it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's good to join you all here today. We're on Wurundjeri country, so I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands upon which we gather, and I also acknowledge their important role in the ongoing discussions in the work of Homes Victoria, not just as it relates to the towers redevelopment, but to the delivery of social and affordable housing, and the work that goes on to address intergenerational disadvantage, poverty and lack of opportunity.
So it's a privilege to be here today to talk you through the work that we are doing as part of the redevelopment of the ageing high-rise towers across Melbourne. You've heard from numerous witnesses about the history and the profile of this redevelopment program, and given that time is short, I'm not planning on duplicating that chronology. But what I do want to say very clearly is that the Andrews and now Allen government believes very strongly that every Victorian deserves access to a safe, stable and affordable home, and that in recognition of this belief and in response to more and more Victorians struggling to access housing, we've released the housing statement, which, as you know, referred to the importance of making sure that we could develop further housing over the following decade, and that the 44 ageing high-rise towers were no longer meeting the needs of residents. You've heard ample evidence of that from a range of different perspectives in the course of this inquiry. To reiterate, however, and I would invite you to turn your minds to what you have seen yourselves at the high-rise towers. They are ageing. They have exceeded the lifetime for which they were originally developed. You're well aware of the precast concrete slab construction. You're also aware of what is happening globally around the redevelopment of housing towers with similar configurations. We know that key systems, as you have heard, like plumbing, like sewage, are breaking down, and that disability access and fire safety standards are not being met. Irrespective of your view on the towers, the facts of their decline are clear. And it's also important to note that $110 million per annum on capital and operational maintenance is something that we are investing not because it's a luxury but because it's a necessity, to make sure that in acquitting our responsibility to safe and stable and affordable housing, we're doing so in a way that makes the very best use of the funding that we have as part of the maintenance budgets. But this is swimming against a very strong current of deterioration. As you've heard, the concrete slabs themselves were built for a 50-year lifespan. And this program of redevelopment is a multi-decade process, because we know that if we don't act now, then we won't have plans in place to replace these towers with the homes that are bright and beautiful and modern and energy efficient, homes that people in our social housing system deserve as part of tenure blind development and as part of making the best possible use of the land that we have available, including in environments and neighbourhoods that are connected to areas where people have grown up, have raised their kids, have celebrated significant milestones and mourned the loss of family members. We want to make sure that we're honouring these communities. We want to make sure that the housing that we are providing for people is not degraded to the point where we have to act with undue haste in a way that doesn't give people choices because we left it for too long. You've seen yourselves what happens with copper piping, with concrete in high traffic areas as it degrades. You've seen yourselves the work that we can do and the work that we are doing to develop and to deliver new housing for people, housing for vulnerable people, housing using a range of models to deliver as much housing as possible in locations where people can remain connected to the things that they hold dear. And giving people options and choices is an intrinsically important part of this process. But I also want to make very, very clear, I'm under no illusions, and the government is under no illusions about the fact that this is difficult, that change is a really challenging and often distressing thing for people who have called the towers home, often for their entire lives. We're working so carefully with people to assist them in understanding the options that they have available, in ongoing conversation in a way that is accessible. We want people to have a sense of empowerment and autonomy that often, because of vulnerabilities or trauma that they've experienced in the course of their lives, they have not had, to the extent that they deserve and to the extent that we are providing them. There is always more work to do. There is more work to do in addressing the challenges of affordability and of availability.
I also want to make a brief point about the interconnectedness of social housing, that's community and public housing, of affordable housing, of other parts of the housing continuum, from homelessness services right through to private ownership. We know that unless we are delivering more housing to accommodate the growth in population and the acuity of demand, that we are going to be seeing greater poverty, greater disadvantage. And this is where development of these sites has been contemplated with a 10% uplift, a minimum 10% uplift in social housing, also to treble the density of people who can call these sites home. We will be the size of London is now by the 2050s. We also know that people struggle to find rental accommodation. We know that people need wraparound services. We know that partnerships with the Commonwealth are essential if we are to build housing at the scale that our population growth demands. So we are determined to continue with this work, because if not now, then when? When we see a cataclysmically terrible failure of precast concrete slab construction that we know that you have seen with your own eyes is deteriorating and will continue to deteriorate, when it gets to the point where people cannot age in place safely and with a right to quiet enjoyment because the buildings that they call home are not fit for purpose. We've taken the decision to act now in delivering a multi-decade process of redevelopment. As I said, this is work that is happening carefully. It's work that is happening in a sensitive and determined way. And the people who are delivering this work very, very hard to be far more than just professional. They are invested in this. The 26 people part of relocations teams pour every bit of energy and effort that they have into making sure that people are equipped with the information that they need, but also a singular point of contact to have conversations with, discussions with, to have the option to change their minds. And as we continue to work through this process, we'll continue to step through it with the sensitivity that it deserves, whilst also recognising the inherent need to make sure that these ageing buildings are able to be developed and replaced by something which is safe, stable and affordable, because that is no less than what Victorians deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Xing. I'm going to go first to Dr. Heath.
Thank you so much, Minister, for coming and presenting here today. Why did your department spend over $3 million in the Supreme Court to keep the business case for the Housing Towers secret? Okay, so there's been legal proceedings. There are also legal proceedings that remain underway. So again, just by way of caveat, I'm not going to be making any comment in relation to legal proceedings that are on foot. There are questions of law that are yet to be determined. Homes Victoria has taken the action that it has in relation to a defence of its position and the work that government is undertaking as part of redevelopment. And as you would know from the decisions and the judgments that have been issued already, there were claims of privilege that were sought and that were granted in respect of certain classes of document. The development of the 44 public housing towers are best served by the total demolition, as opposed to the evidence given today by the engineer that designed and built the foundations and the expert architectural witnesses, and there were quite a number of them today, that a modern refit and refurb would and should be done, as it's better for the environment and it's better financially. Why have you only made 12 of the 158 documents relating to the details of these public? Again, this is something which has been discussed at length, both here in this committee and also in the Parliament. The Attorney has issued a response to the request for documents indicating that 12 of the total request for documents be released and that the remainder be, not provided on the basis of privilege, and that's what has been determined, and privilege operates for a good reason, and that was something that was explored at length by the judge in question, who had made a determination that the privilege was, as exercised, justified. What are you hiding, Minister? Again, it's an interesting question there, because again, no matter how many times you ask, I'm not going to stray from the fact that privilege has been exercised and that the exercise of that privilege has been withheld by the courts.
Do you accept that there's a huge amount of frustration? I'm sure you've been watching the proceedings, that there's so little transparency on what's being done with public land, public housing towers and public money.
We've been very clear about the public money. We've been very clear about the public land and the work that is happening there. We've been very clear about engaging with residents. We've been very clear about the rationale for this work. And so this work goes on. Dr. Heath, it is about making sure that as the redevelopment program continues, we're doing it in a way that provides people with the best measure of agency that we can provide in the course of increasing the density across these sites and also in the course of engaging with people about a relocations process, a right of return, and about ongoing engagement to access services and supports.
Thank you. Why wasn't the contract for Flemington and North Melbourne Towers made public?
The contract for Flemington and North Melbourne. So again, contracts are commercial in confidence. The way in which we report on items as allocated within the budget is in the budget, and again it's about $836 million allocated thus far, and we'll continue to deliver on that work because that's our priority.
Next time is about 5 seconds.
About 5 seconds. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for joining us today. Minister, is the government deliberately failing to maintain these towers?
No.
To construct a rationale for?
No, and I've got to say, it's deeply irresponsible to make a claim that assets are being sweated when they're not assets. And again, I heard a reference earlier to these towers being described as the largest asset that Victoria has. To paraphrase you, Mrs. Hermans, they're homes. We're talking about places that people call home, and that's where, again, the investment that we make in maintenance is to make sure that at the very least, as we swim against this current of deterioration, we're doing so in a way that enables us to check and to stabilise and to repair and to improve and, in a range of examples, to retrofit. But we're also talking about towers of between 12 and 31 stories tall. When we invite a discussion about how it is that we can, through maintenance, preserve the longevity of a home that any one of us might call our own, we're not talking about a 31-storey building that was built with a lifespan of 50 years. We're not talking about unique precast concrete slab construction or bathrooms with a hob on them or doorway widths that don't enable people to move freely through them if they have a chair or a frame. We're actually talking about the need to make adjustment and improvement to provide dignity and privacy and safety and quiet enjoyment to people wherever we possibly can. And that's where that investment goes. But we know that there is only so much that we can do, as you've heard from previous witnesses, before the structural integrity of these buildings is not able to, again, be improved to a point where it enables further longevity. And I've heard a range of comments, a range of reports. We've discussed this in the Parliament around retrofit. The inherent challenges in retrofit are well understood, and Mr. McCurry's evidence before was really, really clear. When we talk about the application of a surface treatment in order to enable...
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I want to go back to the 146 documents withheld from the Parliament under executive privilege. Under Legislative Council Standing Order 10.03, even when executive privilege is claimed, the documents must still be provided to the clerk and the member who moved the motion. I can confirm that neither have received them. Why did your government ignore the standing orders?
Again, the attorney's written to the Parliament. That letter has been tabled alongside documents that were provided in part in response to that request for documentation, and that's the attorney's position, that's the government's position, and I'll leave it there.
Will you now provide these documents to the clerk and the motion mover as you're required to under the standing orders?
Again, the attorney has addressed that matter, including by way of release of 12 of those documents.
And when will that happen? the documents being released? She said
number 12.
Oh, sorry, yes. How can the public believe the government minister has made the best economical decision with taxpayer money and public land if the government only released 12 of the 158 documents it has detailing this plan?
The best use of taxpayer money, Ms. Gray Barberio, relates to meeting our obligations to provide people with safe, secure and dignified housing.
Minister, would you agree that involves transparency?
I might just continue my answer if I may.
Oh no, I'd like for you just to answer that side question, which is really important, Minister, here for the committee and for the Victorian public. Is transparency a paramount value when it comes to taxpayer money and public land? The Victorian public deserves to know from their government transparency and accountability. Is that part of the decision making?
Let me be as transparent and as clear as I can possibly be. The 44 towers have exceeded their operational life.
Where's the
44 towers were built with a lifespan of 50 years. At the time that they were built, it was made abundantly clear. They were built with a lifespan of 50 to 70 years. That time is now. What I would suggest to you, Ms. Gray Barberio, is the responsibility of government is to make decisions that contemplate changing needs of communities and that also contemplate risk, that contemplate amenity, that contemplate the way in which we are supporting vulnerable people. And it is hardly fair to suggest that failing to provide people with housing that meets their needs, their aspirations, and the base level of amenity being enjoyed by other people as part of our housing investment is not
part of your government's responsibility and good governance that involves accountability and transparency. Now, the committee, we've just heard from Homes Victoria, who, similar to what you're saying to us now, are not producing documents. This is in the public interest. Thousands of lives are being impacted by your government's decision. And as part of responsibility and good governance, that involves transparency and accountability. So will you be clear with the committee today whether your government will make every effort possible to produce these documents under Standing Order 10.03?
Ms. Gray Barberio, I'll say it again. The court has been clear that the exercise of executive privilege is legitimate and is reasonable. 12 documents have been produced by the attorney. One of the things that I would say, however, is that mis and disinformation about the way in which these towers redevelopments are occurring is doing far more damage.
I'm going to ask you
Ms. Gray Barberio,
to resist the temptation to go down that road. Okay, the question
exercised by you and your colleagues,
Minister, the question has been very clear to you.
I've answered it.
Will you follow the standing orders and provide the documents to the motion mover and the clerks? That's part of the standing orders.
I've addressed the answer to that 3 times now.
And we have to move on to the next questioner, which is Mrs. Hermans.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister. Actually, it's very interesting because you've said that everything's been very clear, but for us here on the panel, and they were your exact words, in terms of public housing, public land and the public money and the way this is all being done in terms of these towns, it's all been very clear, but we wouldn't be in this inquiry if it was very clear. So I have a number of questions for you. One was, I do want to take up the fact that you mentioned, you admitted that the towers are in a state of deterioration. Now, I understand with age, yes, buildings can deteriorate, but that's when they're not properly maintained. So to what level of responsibility will you as the Minister of the departments involved in this accept that some of that deterioration is as a result of a lack of maintenance?
Mrs. Hermans,
it's just a simple question. To what extent is the question? I don't need a big elaborate response on something that's totally different.
As Mr. McCurry went into in his evidence before, which I think you disagreed with pretty stridently, we
$710 million in maintenance works, capital and operational, every year. Yep. No matter how much money we put, Mrs. Hermans, into the maintenance budget, it will not change the steady incursion of chlorate into precast concrete construction panels in high traffic areas, which are deteriorating and can be seen to deteriorate increasingly with every year that passes.
Okay, so with all due respect, we have heard from architects and the people who were involved in the foundations of some of these towers, and they have made it very clear that it is a simple fix. It's not a difficult fix, it can be done. People that work in the industry are able to do it. So then that's why we have a number of questions about the lack of information coming from the government. I want to move on to something else. So what we have seen, you guys have been in government for 12 years, you're in charge of your budget.
So I'll pick you up on that. I'll pick you up on that. And this is where, again, the $6.3 billion big housing build and regional housing fund are a record investment. What we have done in the last term of the Labor federal government, which continues now, is to get that access to support, including through the Social Housing Accelerator program, which itself is supporting the development of the red brick towers. Now, Peter Dutton actually said he was going to scrap the Housing Australia Future Fund. That's a $10 billion fund.
That has absolutely nothing to do with this.
Well, you just asked about why
you guys have been in government for 12 years and you need to take responsibility. Now, in evidence given today...
We'll pause there. What's your point of order, Mr. Galea?
Can the Minister please be asked questions without being yelled at?
Minister is going to respond to the questions that Mrs. Hermans is going to put to her. You've got 16 seconds, Mrs. Hermans.
In evidence given today, based on the information publicly available, the Elgin Street and Nicholson Street redevelopment will provide only an extra 35 beds. Because you are demolishing instead of refitting, these 35 extra beds will come at a cost of nearly $2 million each. And on top of that, you are still going to, with new developments, have maintenance costs. Minister, is this good value for money? For
retrofit would reduce the total number of homes. It would not be practicable. Everyone would need to relocate, and it's not fair on residents. Simply to bring housing up to a habitable standard costing $2.3 billion over 20 years, that's hardly a good deal for taxpayers or for residents, Mrs. Hermans.
I reflect on your ministerial diaries, Minister. It's evident that you've met with real estate, with investors, with super fund private developers in developing the plan before us, with super housing partnerships and Assemble, who I understand are now merged, alongside Homes Victoria's Towers Transactions Director. There have been multiple meetings, I understand, with these people who have private developer, commercial interest in the towers. Can you confirm for the committee whether any access, investment opportunities or roles were discussed in these meetings?
In these meetings with
the parties that I've just named?
Oh, sorry, the parties, I beg your pardon. I don't ever traverse issues that are the subject of procurement processes, tenders or expressions of interest. I am rigid to the point of stubborn infuriation on the point of who I will discuss what with. Any matters that are the subject of procurement processes, are the subject of tenders, RFPs or contractual engagement are absolutely ruled out of bounds whenever I have any meetings with any party that either is directly or may be directly or indirectly involved in those transactions.
Minister, are you prepared to release the minutes from these meetings to the committee?
I'm not sure there would be minutes.
Are you able to look for that on notice and provide them if available?
I'm not in the habit of keeping minutes from meetings that I have in the same way that I don't keep minutes for meetings with renter consultative committees. I don't keep minutes from meetings with the Valuer General. I don't keep minutes from discussions with members of Development Victoria or DTP. So again, I'm happy to talk you through the general conversations that I have. I'm not happy to go into detail of any confidential matters, but again, I would hope that the statement that I've just given you provides you with a measure of comfort. I take matters of integrity incredibly seriously, Mr. Puglielli, so I'm giving you that assurance here in this committee, with all of the seriousness that this committee and its processes involve, to confirm that I do not discuss as a matter of course any matters that are the subject of any discussions over which I might actually or in perception have any influence.
Just as I end my time, to make sure I've understood you correctly, no minutes were kept of these meetings?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. You spoke about agency for residents at the beginning. Don't you think it would be good for that agency to understand the rationale and the evidence supporting them having to be relocated to another place? In particular, I'm talking about the cost-benefit analysis, which you say justifies their relocation. Do you think they deserve to know that?
I don't think it's, Chair, just a question of a cost-benefit analysis.
That is certainly a big factor that feeds into the decision to relocate and basically demolish.
I would say that the predominant reason for and rationale for the tower's redevelopment is their very condition and the typology of their construction. And as you've heard in other evidence, globally, retrofit is not being considered and demolition and deconstruction is occurring simply because of the fact that the structural components of buildings like these don't actually make for a reasonable case for retrofit. What I would say though, Chair, is that the thing that is driving us is the quality of housing, and the availability of housing will be determined by the pace at which we can deliver it, and also the work that we do around engagement, around consultation and discussion on the sorts of things that people want, the way in which they can
respect. My ask was about giving agency to those that live there, because they deserve an understanding about the justification about why they're being asked to move out, sometimes for up to 10 years, so that these towers can be demolished and redeveloped. Do you think they deserve to know?
Well, it's between 6 and 8 years, as I think you may have heard from the CEO of Homes Victoria, and that's actually set out in the materials that have been provided. There are many materials that are provided. I think they were attached to the Homes Victoria submission to this inquiry, and of course there is a lot of work that happens, including with interpreter engagement, with community discussion. Housing support officers work with people every single day to provide them with information, and again, this is part of the work we do all around the state. The scale of it is different, but the work to make sure that people understand that their housing may no longer be or may soon no longer be fit for purpose is an ongoing conversation.
I can certainly appreciate that, and you've said that evidence is well understood. I've got to say it's probably not well understood by this committee because we haven't received evidence to that effect. Now, you've talked about structural engineers' reports and those sort of things. We haven't received those. Would you be able to...
Have you held the concrete in your hands that crumbled, Chair?
If you took me up to a brand new car and said, geez, that's a great car, I'd say, yeah, okay. Mate, I'm not an expert on that sort of thing. I'm looking for a report from you that you can provide to the committee that justifies the decision. Can you provide that?
Have you seen the sewer stacks, Chair?
I'm asking you, can you provide a report?
Have you stood in a tower and listened?
Minister, I'm asking you if you can provide a report.
Have you been in a tower in the middle of winter or in the height of summer? Have you tried looking for a cool place?
I'm the one asking the questions here, please.
Well, again, I'm going to answer the questions with the sort of lived experience that people are telling us. And again, you just heard from Mr. Kretzer about the way in which transfer applications are higher across the towers, and they're highest when we're talking about towers that are in the first tranche.
Minister,
we're talking about 16% of transfer applications coming in through that first tranche of towers.
Point of order. Yes, Ms. Grey-Barberio.
Minister, I think the Chair has been very clear in this question. I would ask you to stop meandering and just answer the question.
You've got to go through me, I think.
I'm not sure that's a point of order, but anyway.
Look, I'll ask the question again. I'll restart the clock. Will you provide structural engineering reports that justify the decision to demolish the towers?
Again, there have been a number of documents that have been released, and again, Mr. McCracken, as you've heard from witnesses earlier in the hearings, there is work that is undertaken all the time around assessment of the suitability of those buildings.
Minister, we don't have that evidence. You talk about going through the building, but I'm looking for an engineer's report that justifies your government's decision, which is what we're seeking, to understand the justification of the decision that you made as a minister to
demolish the towers.
What I would invite you to do, Chair, is perhaps go back and very carefully look at the evidence that Mr McCurry gave earlier this afternoon. He is an expert. He's provided you with
Minister,
context
I'm
of the
not asking
technical
for Mr
detail.
McCurry's evidence. I'm asking for a report from you.
No.
I'm asking you to provide a report.
Materials have been released, as you've seen. They've been provided publicly. And again, we rely upon those materials. And I also just want to be really clear. The claim of privilege in relation to matters the subject of Cabinet confidence, Cabinet discussions and Cabinet deliberations has been upheld by the court. I don't think that anyone is suggesting that the towers are not requiring of development. It's about what that looks like and about how that looks. And this is where, as government, we've taken a decision.
Thank you, Minister.
By reference to a range of considerations that the towers
have exceeded their operational life, but we are lacking evidence of that. So we'd like something for you to justify that that is actually the case.
They were built between 68 and 75.
I know when they were built. I'm asking for an engineer's report.
They had a lifespan of 50 years. These are not opinions, they're facts.
To be fair, Chair, that my time is up, unfortunately.
Thank you, Minister. It's interesting that throughout this whole inquiry, after many public hearings, none of us are none the wiser as to the benefits of the cost versus benefits of demolishing or renovating.
Can you let her speak, please? Yeah, I'm going to start again.
And that is a concern to me. The other thing that is a major concern is every time there is a question put to you, it seems that there is this astronomical deflection where you go on a lecture about misinformation and disinformation. Well, we have been trying to get the truth and the information, and it is your government that has withheld it. In fact, I think it's 146 documents that have been withheld. So I really don't think you can lecture anyone in this committee or within the Parliament on not having the correct information if you are not going to give it. So this is an important inquiry. It's public land, public towers, public money, and it's in the public interest. And the last question I'm going to have is if you want to clear up those complaints that you've had, Minister, are you going to release the remaining documents? Please don't mistake my determination and my commitment to some of the most vulnerable people in Victoria as a lecturer. Dr. Heath, that does a disservice to the work that is happening day and night to provide people with what they need. I'm very interrupt there. You are not the hero of the Victorian people. We're trying to get answers here. We are trying to get the best outcome, like you are, for these residents. So just, can you come back and answer my question, please? Again, Dr. Heath, I'm answering the question as you put it to me. We will continue to work with people on their terms, in their way. And this is why 88% of people have either relocated or are in the process of relocating. There are 26 people yet to agree, and we will continue to work with them carefully, respectfully, sensitively. We will meet people where they are in order to assist them with the homes that they deserve. And I am under no illusions. I'll finish where I started about the challenges and about the distress associated with major change. That applies to everybody in every chapter of their lives. It's incumbent upon us to recognise that, to respect it, and to incorporate it into the systems of engagement that we have. And that's at the heart of the decision to redevelop these towers, as much at the heart of it as the engagement that people are doing every single day with people one-on-one about their lives and where their lives will be long after this committee has finished its deliberations. So the answer to the question is no?
I've answered the question, Dr. Heath.
No.
That brings a conclusion to this session.
If you go down in the woods today, you're sure of a big surprise. If you go down in the woods today, you better go in disguise. For every bear that ever there was will gather there for certain, because today's the day the teddy bears have their picnic. Every teddy bear who's been good is sure of a treat today. There's lots of marvelous things to eat and wonderful games to play. Beneath the trees where nobody sees, they'll hide and seek as long as they please. That's the way the teddy bears have their picnic. Picnic time for teddy bears. The little teddy bears are having a lovely time today. Watch them, catch them unawares, and see them picnic on their holiday. See them gaily gad about. They love to play and shout, they never have any cares. At 6 o'clock their mummies and daddies will take them home to bed, 'cause they're tired little teddy bears. If you go down in the woods today, you'd better not go alone. It's lovely down in the woods today, but safer to stay at home. For every bear that ever there was will gather there for certain, because today's the day the teddy bears have their picnic.